This podcast is part of the Spoon Podcast Network, home of smart conversations that feed your mind.
The future of food is being created as we speak. And the science fiction of today might become the science fact of tomorrow. I'm your host, Mike Lee. I'm a food futurist, innovator, and author. Each week, we explore today's signals to reveal tomorrow's possibilities. We'll challenge assumptions, we'll question conventional wisdom, we'll imagine what could be, and talk to the innovators who are shaping what will be. This is the Tomorrow Today Show. Let's get started. Hey there, everybody. Hello, world. It is Mike Lee. I am here with the Tomorrow Today Show. Today, we are talking about the future of restaurants. We know them, we love them, we all eat at them. I grew up in a restaurant family, so it's very near and dear to me. And restaurants have sort of been through a lot over the past decade. You've got the pandemic where we kind of ask, can the world handle not eating out anymore? Delivery stepped up. That's been brewing too. What does it mean to have food at the touch of a button? How does that change how we approach food? Reservation bots have popped up in the last few years and kind of turned tables into opportunities for ticket scalping and things like that. And then, of course, we've got the ever-growing influence of influencers and how they kind of have altered the state of how you market and stand out in a restaurant. But there's a lot more looking ahead, and there's no shortage of change, and that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to cover everything from labor. Can restaurants survive and pay a living wage anymore? The ever-present looming threat or benefit of automation, depending how you look for it. Inflation, prices. Are people going to be able to pay what restaurants need to survive, or does the traditional restaurant model need to be reinvented? And then, of course, AI, which has touched so many different things, but haven't quite seen that much yet come to fruition in restaurants. But we're going to explore what that all means. Today, this show is all about thinking about how the future of food is being built today. I'm not alone, of course. Today, we have some great guests with you. We're going to have Kristen Hawley later, journalist and founder of the wonderful Substack Expedite, covering all the food and innovation trends in the restaurant industry. We'll have Elizabeth Tilton, founder and CEO of Oyster Sunday, which is a hospitality studio based in New Orleans. And then we'll have David Rodolitz, co-founder of the Flyfish Club. Last but not least, with me here today is today's episode's co-host. We've got Mike Wolf, founder of The Spoon. How you doing, Mike? What's going on?
I'm doing well, and I'm excited to be here with you. This is one of my favorite topics, and I would love to hear more about your upbringing in restaurants. I'm excited to talk about this with you.
Yeah, it's I grew up in Detroit, and my whole family. I used to joke a lot that growing up as a high schooler, I was never within like 10-15 minute drive of having a free place to eat. We had parents, aunts, uncles all having restaurants. They're all kind of Chinese American restaurants, and so I spent a lot of time as a kid in those restaurants. I was always the kid doing his homework in the booth in the front. And so, yeah, it just kind of breathed to me. But you've been
I've always
following this
felt like
space.
I've always said that everyone should work in a restaurant because I think it directly is correlated with your empathy towards humanity. And I
I
can
agree.
imagine growing up in a restaurant must have made you a very empathetic and wonderful person, which you are.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I ironically never worked a day in a restaurant, in a real restaurant, including my parents. My first job
Okay.
out of college, weirdly, was I worked in an Italian banquet hall. And I set up tables like for a wedding. Like me and my buddies would get there at like noon and set up all the tables. But my parents were kind of like, go get a real job because if you work for us, it's not going to be like we're either going to be too hard or too lenient on you. And that's not the real world. So I appreciate that lesson. But yeah. And then I had a supper club for like 11 years. So that's weird. That was kind of like my
Gosh, that's amazing.
quasi restaurant thing, right? Yeah. Yeah. We did an underground supper club from 7 till 2018 or so. And so we actually cooked and planned and conceived all these things. But yeah. But you run the Spoon, you founded the Spoon. We're on your podcast network, which is so exciting that you're doing this and having me on there. From all that you've seen in the past maybe decade in restaurants and innovation, what do you think has maybe surprised you the most, where you're kind of like, oh, I kind of didn't see that coming, and that's kind of meaningful?
I think that we all recognize that restaurants is, as a business, incredibly difficult. And I think we've seen more curveballs thrown at this space than perhaps any other industry. But I think the resilience has really surprised me of a lot of restaurants. I think the failure rate's still there. I think, it's still an incredibly difficult business, but it's such a strong community. Operators in the space are some of the toughest. And so I think they're super resilient. And I think that was on display more than ever, especially the last 5 years since the pandemic. I also think the openness to embracing innovation as a survival mechanism, whether that's technology or trying new business models, I think that's been really interesting to watch and fun to watch as a journalist and an industry watcher, because there's always something new, whether that's a tech powered dining club or using a new robot or trying to figure out how AI is going to change your operations. I think it's just a really fun space to follow because it's so multidimensional.
You hit a nerve on one of the things you said that I think about a ton, and I don't have a clear answer for it, but like the embracing of innovation and change. Like I've felt for a long time that like, if you look at smartphones, right? We've all been conditioned to kind of expect that our iPhone is gonna be better every single year, and that's a pretty relentless pace. Whereas like you think about food, and there's a lot of things that are kind of celebrated because they don't change, like the formula for Coke is beloved because it has virtually never changed, right? They don't update Coke every single year. And restaurants too, I think too. Like, I mean, you look at a McDonald's to a Chipotle, it's kind of like, we breed comfort and consistency. So, I mean, like, do you think there's some parts in the restaurant industry that are kind of more resistant to change versus others?
Yeah, because food is so tied to heritage and culture and upbringing, and our we are programmed from an early age to like a certain type of food, or we're nostalgic around food in restaurants, and so I think restaurants have to strike that balance of, hey, how do I adjust to survive in a rapidly changing terra firma as the ground shifts out from under me, but also how do I bring my loyal fans with me and not disenfranchise them? Because I think that's a tough balance. I think.
Yeah, like I feel like the operational stack for a restaurant, one of the more meaningful things that's changed is like a behind the scenes thing around like POS systems, right? That stuff has been more or less completely digitized, but as far as like the humans eating go, it doesn't really impact that experience. And so it does seem like a lot of those changes are kind of beyond the scenes. It's almost like use the digital things to more better enable the analog things.
Yeah, simple things like QR codes to pay at the table or get a menu. Consumers embrace that. As long as you give older people who are resistant to change, like my mom, an option. She wants a paper menu, right? But like me, I'm like always wondering why I couldn't look at the menu on my phone or why I couldn't pay at the table. And so, and those aren't like super new technologies. QR code is not new, but
The
the
pandemic
pandemic
was
forced
the
the
pandemic
pandemic
was
forced restaurants.
pandemic was the best thing that ever happened to the QR code. Like it
Exactly.
really,
And
yeah.
it was something that I think forced restaurants to change, and I think they've all kept with it since then. And so I think, yeah, it was a great little change amidst a sea of like misery, which was the pandemic. So
So are you on team QR code menu or team not QR code menu? Because this is a lightning rod issue.
I want an option for both. I think it's funny, like in the world of kitchen tech, there was an old sous vide circulator. There's a startup, essentially that started by Chris Young, which was Chef Steps, and they forced everyone to basically use an app to control the thing. And it was a lightning rod because some people hated having to use an app to control a physical cooking device. So I think menus are similar. You want to give people the options for both, something that is physical if they request it, but also the option to like look at a digital QR code based menu.
I think that's probably the right answer because I think that's kind of the definition of like hospitality, right? is not just kind of beating over the head everybody with a one size fits all solution. I totally get it. Like not everyone can do it, but yeah, I don't know.
Where are you? Where are you on this?
Oh, it it the question differs by like category, right? Like I don't eat at McDonald's that much, but like fast food, I'm all for the kiosks and having that whole experience because it's not like it was like a wonderfully romantic experience before standing in line and walking up. Like all that stuff, order your Starbucks ahead of time on your phone, love it, love it, love it. But then like for some blurry line of restaurant tiers that is like, you know, even just casual sit down, like I want the paper. I want the paper. And I don't really care about the reading part. Like it's not that I have trouble reading it like my parents do or something like that, but I one of my biggest pet peeves is just cell phones out of the table. So like I'm very
Yeah.
high tech, but I'm very old school in a way, right? Like like I don't know, like I can't stand it when like you'd be talking to somebody, you're just having a really good conversation, and then somebody's like, "Oh, I'm trying to remember the name of that thing," and then they're like, "Hold on," and then this thing just comes up, and it just kind of like intersects, you know?
Oh my
I don't.
gosh. I don't know if we could have dinner together, Mike. I feel like I was talking about SNL 50 the last week, and I'd remember a skit or a player. I'd have to bring up my phone, and this happened over dinner a couple times. But I feel like there's a correlation between quick service, fast service, and the amount of digital technology to expedite the process versus a more rich, full service dining experience where you're paying more. It's a nice dining environment. I don't want a lot of digital technology. I want to be taken back. I want
Yeah.
like love service. But if I'm at McDonald's or even like going into Chipotle or something like that, I'm okay with more digital.
Well, I'd say the caveat here too. I think it's place specific, but I also think it's like
Yeah.
quality specific. Like I'd maybe rather have like a kiosk in a restaurant than having a really terrible server, you know? Like a really
Mm,
terrible service experience. So, and that's the hardest to predict, right? Because who kind of knows, right? There's one restaurant here in Detroit that has amazing food. I will not name it at all, but their food is amazing, but the atmosphere inside is just kind of so like overly pretentious for Detroit at this stage. Like I think they're like the grill in New York City and something like that. Like they gave me a lot of shit for wearing a baseball cap in there. And they're like,
mm,
you must take it off. I'm like, come on, guys. So, but I'm like, I'm not coming back here again. However, I really miss their food. So I'm like, I'm just gonna DoorDash
maybe.
it. I'm just gonna DoorDash
Yeah.
it and pick it up and eat it in my car on the corner. Because like the food they make is doesn't ship very well, but yeah. So
I wonder when I look at restaurants, maybe we can draw a comparison to grocery formats and food retail. I
yeah.
feel like grocery stores that force customers to do one form of checkout, especially if it's highly technology focused, like Amazon Go, is destined for failure. And we've seen that with Amazon. They've had to pull back on that. In grocery stores that allow you multiple checkout modalities, like, okay, for people who want to go fast, there's the self checkout and maybe even like just walk out technology.
Yep.
But I always want to go. I like to go to the cashier. I like to talk to the cashier. I like a grocery chain that has all three, because sometimes I might be in a hurry. I have that one ingredient. I'm baking at home. I need to move fast. I'll do just walk out. But most of the time, I want to talk to the cashier.
Well,
And
and
so,
I think like we have to understand that technology moves fast, but human behavior doesn't. I think like you look at self-checkout in a grocery store, we've had that for a very long time. Like I remember my local Target had like three of them to start, right? Four of them to start. Now there's like 16 of them, but it was such a slow progression. And there's still all the checkout lanes. I feel like it just takes that long, and maybe it's a generational thing, to kind of ease people into the transition. So like I think maybe that's maybe in 25 years everything will be digital. There will be no paper menus, but I do think you're still going to have a really long like transition period into that, right? So, yeah. But again, I think this comes back to what is hospitality, right? Hospitality is leaning on, what the person wants, not necessarily what the restaurant, you know, wants to do all the time within limits. But um, so I want to ask you this because we've talked about AI a lot, obviously, just like everyone, and there's a lot of use cases I've seen in all sorts of realms. I'm a big proponent and supporter of AI. I haven't yet seen the use case for restaurants, and I'm really trying hard. What am I missing?
I think that it's probably happening, but in the operational back end where we're not seeing it. I do think there's a lot of software stacks, both standalone but also integrated into things like point of sale that allow for efficiencies driven by AI. And some of that may be older school AI, just kind of your garden variety machine learning. Increasingly, it might be increased, powered by large language models using, the type of things that are behind ChatGPT. I do think we're seeing large restaurant chains trying to essentially insert it into the customer interaction layer, whether that's at a drive-through, essentially an AI bot, much like we used to call in.
Yeah, the Wendy's
Get someone on the
predictive.
yeah, we get someone on the phone. It was a bot, and that was super annoying. But it's getting way better, and you can't even tell half the time. I think now I'm sometimes at a drive-through. I don't go that often, but sometimes I wonder: is this a real person or is this an AI bot? So, I think that's where we'll see it, and then also in operational efficiencies. I don't necessarily think we'll see it in fine dining or something like that very soon.
Until somebody like Alchemist in Copenhagen figures out how to, have a whole course served by a bot, right? But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, again, I think that's also one of those very place dependent things. I could totally see the use cases in quick service, right? In fast food, which kind of leads me to this other thought of like, I kind of sense that there's like maybe like this a deeper rift is forming between kind of like corporate chains and indie restaurants, meaning a lot of the stuff you're talking about, like getting AI recommendations and, whatever like that, I think like the Wendy's and the McDonald's of the world are way more suited to invest in this. And then that's not even to speak of the other thing that goes with AI, which is like automation, right? In the kitchen. So I sometimes wonder, like, when is it going to be that my average like corner diner could afford a chef robot? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's a good point you bring up because a lot of people conflate and mix the two up, automation and AI, and a lot of times, at CES this past year, the CEO of NVIDIA talked about the arrival of physical AI in largely in the form of automations, and so we are starting to see increasingly humanoid robots powered by large language models. But I think it's good to distinguish between the two now. I would maybe I don't want to say differ with you. I maybe a little bit differ with you. I don't want to say argue with you, but I think I'm seeing increasingly a potential for democratization of these technologies as they become SaaS-based technologies. You could basically get ChatGPT for $20 a month. I'm seeing some folks building SaaS software on top of large language models powered by Google or Meta or OpenAI,
Yeah.
and those become fairly affordable. Also, automation is a little bit harder because physical hardware powered by computers is very expensive. So that is a little bit bigger chasm to cross. But there are some early alpha explorers out there on the indie side that are trying these types of technologies. Some of them are failing, and we can talk about those, and some that are doing really interesting work.
Well, I think the robotics thing is tough because I think we'll hit AGI before we in software before we hit AGI in robotics, right? Like it's not trivial to get a robot to be able to, finally mince chives right now, or actually just have like a varied set of tasks. Because obviously we have a lot of quote unquote robots that we don't think of as robots, like blenders and dishwashers and toasters that do a couple things really well. But like, it's probably a while before you have like a robotic android like sous chef that can do the full range of activities, right? I mean, like, so you've been going to CES and watching stuff. Like, who do you think that who are some of the players in the robotic space for restaurant food service that you think are kind of ahead of the game, and who's pushing like the edge there?
Well, there's been folks that have been out there for a while, like Bear Robotics, which essentially just got acquired by LG, which I thought was interesting. I think there's a race among the big consumer technology players to acquire or get assets because I don't think that's their specialty. Like if you look at like LG, they were not someone who had a bunch of assets to build AI or robotics, and so they had to go out and acquire it. I think some of the large industrial players like Middleby and some of the others are interesting, and they're largely an acquisition company built by acquisition. So if you stand back and look at the large technology platform players, all of them are investing in robotics and automation, and a lot of them are investing in humanoid automation, and so that includes Apple. I think that's going to include Meta over time. It obviously includes Tesla and Musk.
Yeah.
So I do think the foundation is there for really good physical automation around food, because I think computer vision is one of the most advanced forms of AI. And I think that you have to
Yeah.
marry computer vision with kind of more general large language model powered general intelligence thinking. And I think that's not as far off as we think it is.
Yeah, I'm with you on the computer vision. Like I've been noticing the mash gin units at my local stadium here where the Pistons and Red Wings play, where, if people aren't familiar with that, it's basically like a little white platform at like you would say at a concession stand or something like that, or like a convenience store. And instead of kind of checking out your stuff, you just put like a tray of your food on this little white platform. It just snaps a photo of it and charges you appropriately. Like
Yeah.
I've met people at Google Food Lab that do similar things for like food waste, where they're like scanning dish bins and stuff like that to analyze food waste. So yeah, I definitely see software penetrating way faster than hardware, especially as we've seen the cost of inference and training for LLMs precipitously drop. Like I think within already now, I think even a mom and pop could use, an LLM cheaply for I don't know what they're going to do with it, but something, right? But yeah, I don't know. I think the robots, a little further off. Maybe the robots are just gonna look more like humanoid, less like humanoids, and more like the Kato machine at Chipotle. Like they
Yeah.
have,
It's funny. I was just thinking that, like, not multitaskers, but unitaskers, right? Things that do one
yeah,
thing really well, like stripping a core out of an avocado, or just putting sauce and cheese on a pizza. I mean, we've seen Picnic Robot actually having some success with that. But so I think you're right. I think unitaskers, and then ultimately over time, you'll start to see more of the disparate parts of food service tied together through automation. I think first in the back of house. I think it makes more sense, and you have to balance front of house automation robotics, because I do think it creeps some people out. I mean, there's a almost like a circus like kind of attraction to robotics in the front of house that
yeah.
is cool at the beginning, but after a while it starts to creep people out, and especially as we see it taking people's jobs.
I think you're right about the humanoid thing too, because the whenever the day is that the humanoid like is introduced into a dining room or kitchen, it's got to be so battle tested that it's like almost infallible, right? Because I think the bar will be so high. Like I think the second a humanoid robot drops a plate, it's like this thing's garbage. Come on, we can't do this. This is creeping me out, right? Whereas I think like the Kato machine just looks like a giant box, you know? It's like purposefully non-cliche futuristic looking, right? It makes avocado like guacamole, right? Um, which begs the question, like, is that any different than just food processors and blenders and stuff like that, which we've had, you know?
That's a
Um,
great point. It's the dishwasher we don't see as a robot, but
but
is
it
probably
is.
it was a
Yeah.
miracle in the 70s, like this thing that washed dishes. On the front of house side, I think if you're gentle about it and it does something where it works cobots, it works alongside the human well. I think Bear Robotics has done that, and it's not surprising because John Ha, who founded the company, had his own restaurant while he's working at Google, and he thought, why can't I use some sort of just simple robot that would haul dirty plates back to the kitchen? And so if it's just something that is hauling dishes, right, and it's not like a creepy robot handing you your food,
Yeah.
I think that's okay. I think that works well.
Well, yeah, and for listeners that maybe don't know what Bear is, Bear they basically have the auto. I mean, they're just kind of like self-driving like small coffee tables that
With the tray, like
with a
self-driving
tray,
tray bots, right?
tray bots. It's a food runner. Yeah. I had a really good experience the first time I encountered one in the wild. It was in Queens, Flushing, Queens, at a Heidi Lau hot pot restaurant, which I have no affiliation with them, but it's a fantastic place and a great experience. But we have one of the, they're huge in China, but we have one of them in Queens, and you think about hot pot, it's like you have this whole like table set up with the hot pot stuff, and usually the kind of stuff you order from hot pot comes on a ton of plates, takes up a ton of surface area, right? Because like you're ordering like thinly shaved beef and it kind of fans out on the plate, so it's like not a lot of ounces, but it's like a lot of space, right? And so um, that's a perfect use case for a food runner because it can just take so much of that stuff. But that's not the part that impressed me. It was the part that like we had a human server. She was like the greatest server I've ever had in a restaurant. And because she was just like completely free to just like worry about our experience, you know? And
Yeah.
like I think that adds up. Like after a long night of service, like if you're not, running plates and just like juggling things and constantly filling water glasses and stuff like that, like I think that really just helps with the stamina. Um, I was with my daughter and the robot had kitty ears on it. This does not look like an add-on. This looked like it was made from the factory this way. It was this tall
Yeah.
robot. I don't know
Yeah.
if it was bear or
Yeah.
not, but it had like a digital face with like a little LED, like, face LED face screen, and then little ears. And if you waved it down, it would stop by your table. And my daughter was like petting it. You can pet it. It like purrs and like
That's
winks.
great.
And my daughter was like, "Oh my God." Like this is amazing. And because that's always a big question, like how much do you anthropomorphize or not, I would say maybe doing a cat versus a human is probably a safer bet, than trying to be
Yeah.
some creep.
Kids love robots. That's undisputed. And I think it makes sense in a restaurant running around. I think I've been watching the sidewalk robot market, and there's been a bunch of these,
Oh, like the
and it's
Waymo.
interesting that yeah, there's Starship, started by the Skype founders. There's Serve, which was a spin out of I think Uber, and a lot of them have little faces. And what you're seeing a lot in cities like LA is some of them getting trashed in public. So I think there's this interesting thing happening, and that I think there's a certain segment of the population that resents automation. And I think when you put things into the wild, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm really interested to watch the drone marketplace and the drone delivery marketplace, because I think I see some people are really excited about that. I've always had my doubts, and I think some people are going to actively take aim at some of these drones trying to deliver food to people.
Where are we with that? And like what's like I don't know. I don't keep up with kind of the drone delivery thing. I too, I've heard murmurs about that for a really long time, but like is this a technical challenge, a distribution challenge? Is this like a FAA kind of thing? Like
It's
where's that?
all of the above. I think
Yeah.
it has to be safety is paramount, and it's really hard to do delivery to a person's particular address. I think it's easier to deliver to like a central landing spot or something. When you're talking about delivering to a person's house, you don't know if they're going to be there in the back. If they even have a backyard, do they get it at their doorstep? If it's dropped via a little rope in your front yard, what's to stop your neighbor's kid from like grabbing it and running away with it? So I'm a big I'm not super optimistic about it. And then also there's just tons of regulation about this, because this is something that's going up into the sky. And so I think there's a lot of FAA regulatory oversight, and there's been some approval for certain cities, but it's certainly something that's going to roll out slowly over time.
Well, I think it becomes problematic when it's happening at scale. Like
Yeah.
if it's like a ultra premium service, like, CVS will ship you over Chipotle will ship you over a burrito if you pay like $10 extra. It's probably not that big of an issue, but like I just don't know how you air traffic control it all. I mean, we're recording this in late February. We've had like 90 airplane accidents this year so far, which
It's
is
crazy. Yeah.
bananas. I can't even imagine how you manage all this stuff if you had thousands and thousands of drones delivering groceries on top of all the other stuff we have to deal with in the sky. Um, Not to mention, I have a lot of friends in New Jersey who have been uh, watching all of those drones hover over. Have you heard of that? How every
Yeah. It's
night they're
weird,
just,
right? It's weird.
I don't know why it's not a bigger deal.
And it hasn't been communicated well from the
No,
government, right?
nobody knows
So
what it is. No one will say. Or I think Trump maybe said like something vague about, oh, those are just hobbyists and, there's no threat. But it's unnerving if you're there's like 20 of them above your house. Yeah.
Yeah, it's creepy. It's also like a little bit like apocalyptic or kind of dark, futuristic kind of world that we envision with a bunch of drones flying overhead delivering food. That's just kind of dark. I do think where things like food delivery robots on the sidewalk work well is in essentially closed environments, whether that's a college campus
Yeah,
or a master plan community. I think that's where that stuff's really going to excel. And I just think putting it on the streets in downtown Seattle or San Francisco, like that stuff's doomed to just get trivialized and
it
messed with.
it just you'd have to overbuild that thing to armor it basically so badly that it's just like, and there's probably, yeah, I just don't see that ending well. All right, well, so the other part that comes up a ton, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, and I think we're maybe starting to see it at restaurants, but this idea of like personalization, and that word gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
99.9% of any conversation that has something about the future of food or something like that, everyone's always talking about personalization. And I don't discount it on the basis, just flat out discount it. I just think like I don't know if that's what people really want. Because maybe I'm just biased, because part of why I like going to restaurants is being able to have agency over what I can choose. Like it's fun, to peruse and decide what you want. But not to mention that to do it really well, I think you need to share a lot of data, you know? Like to get a real meaningful personalization that's not just like a Sweetgreen recommending a salad based off the last 10 salads you had, That's kind of superficial, I guess. But like to really get to this maybe vision of like, what does my body need? I really got to go all out and share everything, right? Because otherwise, like, you can't really do anything meaningful with the data. I don't know
Yeah.
where you stand on that. What team are you on?
It's a different world than it was 10 years ago, right? I think I remember you speaking early on at Smart Kitchen Summit about like this idea of having almost like a food passport. And I thought that was such a cool concept, but I feel like we're in a world today where I think people are hesitant and worried what the big kind of parties that be the platforms are going to do with their data, especially now as we hear about like people getting open access to the Social Security Administration. And like, what are they going to do with that data? It just scares the hell out of all of us, right? So I think you're right. It kind of depends a lot on your tolerance around putting your information out there in public. And if you feel that, hey, I'm gluten intolerant, I like spicy food, um, that being in the hands of like a platform player isn't worrisome, then that's maybe okay. But like maybe if it knows you, like it has access to your genetic makeup and like what your predispositions are towards like certain diseases, that's kind of scary. So it kind of runs a balance between I'm okay with it to a certain degree, but I don't want to just give carte blanche access to my 23andMe records to like in
Yeah.
open platforms.
Well, the thing that gets me is like coming back to my daughter's reaction with the robot at the hot pot restaurant. That was her first experience with an automated thing in a restaurant. And it was largely positive, right? Where I think if we went back there and the robot came back, she'd be like, my God, I'm so excited to see this thing again, right? I want to pet the thing again. Same thing with like, self checkout. She's rarely been with me through a regular checkout line. I just wonder, I think like some of these things that we might fear about privacy or something like that, I don't know which way they'll go. I just probably know they're not going to be the same hangups that we have. They could be way more trusting of this stuff because they grew up digitally native, or they could just completely reject it because they've just seen how it, you know, destroys attention spans and just privacy leaks and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's so interesting and it is so generational, right? I mean, I think a lot about kids today and how they love vinyl and how
Yeah.
they're like they move towards physical tactile things. And I remember about 15 years ago, I was really interested in ebooks. And at the time, everyone was predicting the death of the paper book. But the paper book is actually really strong right now because people realize they didn't want to look at everything's on screens. They're doing their work on screens, they're looking at their phones. And if I want to escape, I want to touch something physical. And I know this is a little bit different. I'm getting back to just the embrace of technology, but I think some people want to keep that real authentic experience in the restaurants, and too much technology there I creates too much of a barrier to people.
Well, and I think it's hard to predict because I think there's double standards for everything, right? Like I think, I've made the analogy a lot about I don't have any nostalgia for paper maps, They were clearly the inferior product, But then here I am like moaning about QR code menus, right? Um, so yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, but I think that's why these things I think move slow, because some of them are just too radical for some people, especially when it comes to food, where I think people feel food's a little bit more personal. Maybe that's why you don't carry your iPhone upgrades every year and might break because you don't put it in your body, It's outside,
Yeah. And at the same time, we're seeing some of these older, staler restaurant chains losing a lot of people, right? So if you look at like the Applebee's of the world and those that seem like, the Cheesecake Factories, which their menus seem like they're largely the same. I feel like they're losing certain younger generation, and the younger generation is moving on a little bit. And so innovation spans both, the overall concept, the menu, the type of food you're offering, and the technology. And I think there's going to be a whole new cohort of exciting chains that come down the pike that maybe attract Gen Zs and younger, right? Which is to me, is kind of exciting.
I agree. Yeah, I think we're like a couple decades into the Sweetgreenification and Chipotleification of like chains. I think chains and those have like extremely loyal like fan bases. Like I didn't realize there's like a whole like
crazy loyal fan bases.
Oh my God, like with Chipotle too, like I didn't realize there's like a whole category of like workout bros that like only eat at Chipotle.
The Chipotle diet, high
But yeah,
protein.
because I think it's because of they've done all the prep for you. You can stand there and just say, "Give me triple beef on this thing," and then you're in and out, right? And it tastes good and things like that.
That was Subway 25 years ago. I feel like Chipotle's the new Subway. Like you watch what they made, you felt like it's fairly fresh. And Chipotle died though. I mean, Subway kind of is dying
Subway
a little
died.
bit.
Yeah. Well,
Subway
I don't
kind of
know
died,
what's
right?
going on about. I haven't heard anything about Subway.
But it shows you that but it shows you that no chain is immune, right? So in 15 years, is something going to kill Chipotle, right? It's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think anything lives forever. I mean, even like McDonald's is so different. Like there's a meme that I love sharing around where it's like they show a McDonald's from like 1980 and it's the outside shot of like the playland and the tube slide and it's like all the primary colors and all that stuff. And then you see pictures of like the current day McDonald's and they look like office buildings, And
Yeah.
they're like
Yeah.
they're like McDonald's grew up and like went on Zoloft or something like that. Like it's just a depressed older person now.
Where are the big playgrounds with the plastic balls that you and I both grew up and the apple pies? Where are those McDonald's?
I know. Well, and I remember like because the Chicago they have that huge like giant flagship location, not their headquarters, which is down the street, but they always had that. And I remember growing up, going there, and it was like styled like a 1950s like diner kind of thing. And it was like a couple levels, and I don't know. It was like whatever. It's like, oh my gosh, this McDonald's is like so extra. And then now I went
They
back.
have that. They have that in Vegas now. There's a 50s diner style McDonald's in Vegas, right?
Yep.
So
I stayed across the street from it. Yeah, we were both just there. But then I went back to that same flagship. I think it's in like River North in Chicago. And it looks like an airport. It looks like JFK. It's still the same footprint. It's huge. And there's tons of seats in there. But you walk in and you see the banks of the kiosks, and that's fine, whatever. But like the thing that kind of depressed me also too is like there's no like playland or anything like that, not even a modernized version of it. And all the seats, or a lot of the seats, have USB plugs in them and wireless charging things. And I was like, and I just looked around and everyone was just kind of eating their own sandwich and like looking at their own like phone on YouTube, right? And maybe you can't avoid that these days, right? But I just get the sense that McDonald's was just kind of like, we're not gonna really try too hard to make this about like a fun night out for your family. We're just gonna give you what you want, which is a USB plug, some quiet time, good Wi-Fi, and like French fries.
They found that kids will still come. It's like they don't need to be Chuck E. Cheese. They realize they can just be like the Happy Meal place, and kids will still go there. You don't need the playgrounds.
I want somebody to pull like a Red Lobster revival on Chuck E. Cheese. I think that is due for
I love
updating.
that. Have you seen that restaurant chain out of Hollywood,
I
run by
have.
one of the guys from Friends, or no, from The Office, BJ Novak? But I love that. I wish that would go wide, and they just, and it seems like the other chains are playing ball. Like you'll do like they'll do like an Applebee's themed week, and Applebee's comes along and does it. So I just love that idea of like it was almost like it's like a holiday, like the holiday store that shows up in the abandoned building.
Yeah,
I
or
feel
like
like it's,
the Spirit Halloween.
yeah, like it feels like that, but it's cool, and it adapts any kind of cool chain concepts.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we still have yet to see what the new CEO for Lobster's cooking up, but like I think there's a lot of brands like that in that space where the nostalgia outweighs the current experience, you know? But there's still a lot of like residents there. Like Pizza Hut was one of the big things that they did with chain. I grew up in Michigan. Pizza Hut was like the pinnacle of pizza for most of my young life, you know, which is wild to think about, but like you look at those red plastic cups and the
Love it.
tip, the lamps, the stained glass lamps, and just the kind of griminess of it and the darkness of it, and you're like, oh, I love it.
I love it. The big shakers with Parmesan and
Yeah,
pepper, and then the giant pitchers of Coke and root beer, and
yeah.
I love that. I miss that.
And their pizza is like neither Detroit. It's neither Detroit like thick crust. It's not Chicago deep dish, but it's also not New York thin crust. It's something in the middle that
Yeah,
it's like.
and it doesn't have the artificialness of Pizza Hut. I feel like,
Yes, agreed, agreed. Maybe we were just different. I don't know. Because like maybe it was
yeah,
like
that's hard to
that
tell.
the way
I think there's something to that. Like I had for my birthday this past week, my wife bought a bunch of Twinkies and Ding Dongs, and I was so excited to have like this call back to my youth, and I ate them and they're so disappointing. Now maybe Hostess is a different company than it used to be, but I feel like maybe I've changed actually. That's probably what really happened.
no, that happened to me recently. I had one of those Hostess like apple pies that had a shelf life of like 1,000 years, and you'd find them at like a convenience store. And like I had one once, and it did not age well with, or it didn't age. I aged out of it. Well, so like McDonald's places, Starbucks has a new CEO in your neck of the woods. And he's gone and said a lot of things, but I think one of the things he was saying that I picked up on that was interesting was something to the effect of like, I want to make this kind of feel like a coffee house again. I think there were some murmurs about him bringing back ceramic mugs, and he's right. Like I think, in my teenage years, college years, we'd go and to Starbucks or whatever the coffee shop was and just hang, right? And just do our homework or chill. And now Starbucks just seems like a transactional, it literally feels like a F1 pit stop, where you're like, get in, get out. And there's not as much kind of hanging out, maybe. Um, which kind of makes me think about like, what do you think like the future of like that idea of the third place is? You know,
Well, I feel like there's mixed messaging there because they also said that they don't want you to just hang out anymore. Didn't they essentially say that, hey, we don't want people just hanging out anymore? They're not going to give access to the bathrooms to just anyone. You have to be a paying customer.
that is mixed messages. I think initially I took it as we've got the express lane and we're going to make that faster for the fast people, and then we're going to have more of a vibe for the vibe people. And maybe that's location based too. But I guess like generally speaking, like there's this place I discovered recently, but Chicago people probably know it. It's a restaurant called Beatrix in Chicago, and I think there's a couple of them. And it's one of these things that is kind of like a jack of all trades restaurant, meaning I don't know their hours exactly, but they're open breakfast all the way to like late night drinks, right? And the whole setup of the place is really designed and conducive for you to literally camp out there the entire day if you wanted to, right? You can go have breakfast over in the cafe over here. You can move over to the next section, which is kind of like light table service, and you can pull your laptop out or have a meeting or something like that, all the way to, sitting at the bar for drinks. And then they're a full service restaurant. And then there's also like a grocery store prepared foods things like attached to them over there, right? And I just wonder, like, also in a world where real estate is not getting cheaper for a lot of these restaurants, especially in urban areas, like how do you, is that something necessary you have to do to survive, just to literally pay for all that square footage, right? Because normally a restaurant, lunch and dinner, they're going to close for a couple hours in between that. And it's just dead space, right? So you're just losing money on that space, right? Like, I don't know. Have you seen much of that out in your neck of the woods in Seattle, or
I
what
don't
do you
know.
think of that?
There was a trend a couple years ago where some companies were trying to take restaurants dead space and during those early morning and afternoon hours and essentially let office workers come in. And I felt like that was kind of a cool idea. I
I
haven't seen
used
too
that.
much. I
I used that for a while, for about a year in New York City.
You did. Okay. Okay. I don't know. I feel like Starbucks kind of lost the younger generation. No one I know, my kids and their friends go to Starbucks anymore. And it makes me wonder why Starbucks just doesn't kind of throw in the towel and on not acquiring other brands. Like, I don't know why they just can't be a General Motors and have the young person brand. Why they haven't gotten into bubble tea yet and bought a bubble tea chain yet just boggles my mind. I think that they just need to serve the corporate crowd because I just don't know if they're going to be able to capture the younger generation at this point. And I don't know if I'm answering your direct question, but I feel like they have a lot of issues. Now, they brought the right guy in. And by the way, I used to get sticker shock and my eyes used to pop out at the salaries NFL players used to get. But now I'm getting Starbucks CEO like amazement at
Oh
how
my
much money this
God.
guy's
What did he
getting.
get? Like $130 million or something like that?
It's crazy. And now he did have a great success record at Chipotle. He did a great
Sure.
job there, right? So, but he's
Yeah.
getting a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah. I feel like I always have this impression, maybe it's false, that you guys just get Starbucks stuff before anybody else does out there. Like, do they have like
We
concept
do.
stores? You do?
We
Okay.
do.
All right.
I did Palm Pay. They actually rolled out Pay with Your Palm here in my local little town, and they only did it in Washington State, I feel like. And speaking of giving out your personal information, I was willing to give up my personal biometric information for a cup of Starbucks dark roast, which is kind of sad, but yeah, we get the early stuff.
All right. I don't want to go as far as to call this a segment, but it's the thing that I like to ask. On all that you've seen around restaurant innovation and stuff like that, what do you call bullshit on?
Oh, that's such a tough question. Um, I feel like so much of people who are trying to do loyalty programs and et cetera, is just they're just trying to mine your personal information to market to you. And I feel like that's a great way to lose some of your loyalist fans. And so I think you have to be really careful with that. I love paying with I like McDonald's app. I think it's a good job, but I think you just got to be careful if you're a restaurant chain and not embrace that just to kind of market to them and send them messaging all the time. That's one thing I would call BS on.
Yeah, there's too many of the loyalty things, I think. It's just like every third message that I get. Um, what's your thoughts on kind of the future of like delivery, ghost kitchens, stuff like that?
I think that there was an over investment in that space. I think that virtual restaurants essentially reminded me of uh, the early 2000s when there was just too much marketing spam on the internet. And I feel like that's what happened with those virtual restaurants. So I'd go on Uber Eats or whatever, DoorDash, and there's just all of these restaurants and you had to wonder which one was real, which one was fake. I think they cracked down on that, which I think was a good thing. But I do think giving restaurateurs other avenues towards monetization. If you have an underutilized kitchen, I really do appreciate. So I do think there's real value in this model if it's done well.
I almost think it might be necessary for some places and locations too, like because I think like the thing that I'm getting out of just post-pandemic, it's tougher to run a restaurant, I think,
Mm,
post coming out of the pandemic. Nothing's getting cheaper. It's the hardest business ever. And I think there's a lot of pressure that's kind of like putting into question, like, does the classic business model even make sense anymore, right? I mean, our two guests today are going to be coming on in a second. The first one, that's definitely a question I want to ask to them because it just feels like in there's a long time where maybe a lot of the fundamental weaknesses maybe or flaws of the restaurant model kind of didn't really rear up to bite anyone in the ass too hard, and then the pandemic kind of just flushed everyone out, right? And just you saw the cracks kind of pop up, right? um
yeah. And I feel like we're entering a new tough period because I think inflation's just going to keep going up. So I think cost of inputs and the cost of labor are going to keep going up. And so I think it's going to be another, I want to say culling period, but it's going to be another tough couple of years, I feel like.
Well, labor, especially too, not just with the cost of labor, with like rising minimum wages and stuff, which is totally warranted and right, but also we've got an immigration hawk in the office now, right? And it's no, it's kind of an open secret, not really, that like there's a decent proportion of kind of restaurants that rely on kind of immigrant labor, sometimes documented, sometimes not, right? And so I kind of wonder like what happens to that when you know, if Trump gets his way, right? Hopefully he doesn't, but is that the thing to kind of shove automation to the front and say like, hey, you know, we got rid of half your staff, but you know, hey, look, we got robots for cheap now, you know? I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
do you spend some
I don't
time in
know.
that world?
Sometimes I feel like the difficulty is the point, and like you have platform technology players who are aligning with the Trump administration, and maybe that's the goal. But I'm hearing the same worries and stress in the agriculture space. I talk to farmers who are really, really worried about them being able to mine or to pull crops from the field.
Yeah.
And so I think restaurants and ag are very similar, and they have a lot of the same challenges, I feel like. And it's interesting that I think they're the two of the toughest spaces, but two of the most essential spaces in food.
Yeah, got it. All right, so Kristen's coming on a little bit, but one question I like to ask everybody at some point in this, and I'll ask you this before our guests start to come on, is let's say you have a crystal ball and it can tell you anything about the restaurant industry in the next 10 years. What would you ask it?
Great question. What is the future? I mean, we talked about personalization, but I really want to know how much they will embrace the idea of creating personalized experiences in the restaurant. I'm really excited about that, but I'm also kind of stressed about where that's going. I would ask that. What are some of the exciting new, I guess, chain concepts or menu concepts that are going to be coming to the fore? One of the most exciting things about restaurants to me is just seeing new restaurant concepts in terms of like is it a new type of food that you haven't seen before? Is it a new type of way of serving the customer? So I think that's what I would love to know.
Yeah, I keep wondering like who's going to be like the next Taco Bell. Like I think Taco Bell does one thing really well and they innovate the hell out of their food. Like I always I'm just curious like what those crazy people are up to, right? Because it seems like they're just prolifically innovating. And that's part of also my concern too about kind of that rift between indies and chains is like how much harder is it to kind of get out of orbit if you are just a person with a food truck with a cool idea, you know, to scale, right? Like it's just, it feels unfeasible, right? Especially as the more powerful and I guess what Sweetgreen's probably the most recent example of that, right? Because I think they came up after Chipotle, pretty sure. And
yeah, indies growth, sometimes it is lightning in a bottle. I feel like I think you've heard of Moto, and you probably may have met Lee Kindle, but like I feel like he is something that's super authentic. He's experimenting with what pizza is. Like he's actually created like a personal, like narrow destroy trail I haven't seen done anywhere else. He created his own pan to do that, and he thinks he could scale craft. It feels like people know what consumers are really good at. Feeling like when there's an authenticity to a restaurant, and when there's a real human behind it versus just a bunch of people in a boardroom creating stuff. I think they're okay with like Taco Bell. Like they have people, hey, here's the new menu, but a new concept. I think if there's authenticity to it, people really gravitate towards that. And I think Moto has that, and they're also innovating. So it's interesting to see where they'll go. I think that's kind of a good recipe for success.
What's Moto doing that you think is an interesting secret sauce? So like explain what the Moto concept is about and how are they kind of pushing?
Well, they came out of essentially Lee was essentially a hostel owner. Like he owned a hostel for some years.
Yeah,
And,
wow.
And every room in his hostel had a special Seattle artist that would create art for the room. And so he's brought a couple of his artists just creating this great graffiti in all the spaces. And so it's a really great space to go into. But then he's still innovating on what the pizza is. And so he's created some great different style pizzas. The pizza tastes great. And even as he's gone from like the conventional Detroit style, which is kind of a square 4 pieces, to like a narrow personal pan style. And he went to the narrow personal pan style, which was like essentially like a cell phone, smartphone size or a little bit longer. He did that because he got invited into the Seattle Mariners Stadium here. And he outsold most of the restaurateurs in the Mariners Stadium. And he's done that also down in Palm Springs in the tennis venue. So wherever he's going, he's also doing it in the Hollywood Bowl. People are just gravitating towards it for some reason. So I think it's a combination of great food, just a great vibe, and just really great tasting.
That's awesome. Hello.
Hey.
We're
Hi.
we're recording.
That's fine. Are you recording video?
We are. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that cool?
Yeah. Are you do you put the full video out?
Eventually.
Okay. All right. No, I know. One time I was surprised by that, and I was like, spent the entire time like doing this and messing with my hair, and like, no. I just always check. I was in LA all day yesterday, hanging out at Sweetgreen actually, and I've been a little frazzled this morning, so.
No worries. Well, hey, thanks for coming on.
Of course.
Deep breath. We're not live, so that's good. Yeah. Welcome. I think you know Mike, right?
Of course.
Yeah. Hey, Kristen.
Yeah. You guys know each other. That's so funny. We were literally just talking about Sweetgreen.
Yeah. Well,
were you at a Sweetgreen or actually the headquarters?
No, I was with Jonathan and Nick talking about some stuff. Yeah.
That'd be funny if you just flew to LA just to go to a Sweetgreen.
They were like, "Oh, would you go to where's your Sweetgreen in San Francisco? Which one?" And I was like, "I don't go to Sweetgreen in San Francisco." Said I go to New York a lot. But I'm not near one here. So
I'm in suburban Detroit now. I lived in New York for 18 years, and Sweetgreen, I think there's 2 of them within 5 minutes of me now, which is I'm not even in downtown Detroit.
Yeah, to 250 locations. That's pretty significant, right?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny because I was like, I know they're growing, but it's still 250, and it's like, I don't think there is one in downtown Detroit yet. There's 2 in the suburbs. So anyway, here we are.
That's their. Yeah.
Well,
stay tuned.
Should have. Oh, okay. Well, so thanks for joining us. I've been a huge fan of your work. We did, I think, meet years ago in passing in other places. It's been a very long time. Maybe just for listeners, who are you? How did you get to where you are here now?
Yeah, well, I'm Kristen Hawley. I'm a freelance journalist, the founder of Expedite, which is a newsletter about restaurant technology and the future of hospitality. I have been covering that business for over 10 years, very specifically. And before that, I worked in magazine editorial, food adjacent, consumer stuff. I worked for Hearst in New York City, but was just, fan of restaurant as wonderful, third place, exciting, creative space, welcoming space, especially in New York, where my apartments were tiny and my roommates were terrible. So
frequent diner.
Yeah. And just I'm a just keen observer of things that happen. Right. So when I moved from New York to San Francisco, I noticed very, very quickly the difference in the restaurant scene here in San Francisco versus New York in just the vibes. Right. And expectations were different. And I pegged that in the year 2009 to the growth, rise, prominence, takeover of the tech industry in San Francisco at the time, which was very different than it is now. It was exciting and fun and young and creative. And I just started writing about that space. And that has led me now to be, a bona fide business reporter covering some of the biggest technology companies in the country that are changing the way that people experience restaurants.
So you kind of got it on this kind of more romantic tip in restaurants, and then you kind of saw the tech wave come in. I think, Mike and I were talking a lot about this kind of, what's the right balance, if that's even the way to look at it. You've written a lot about kind of algorithms and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's that one piece that I think you did an interview with the author of the Filter World book,
mm-hmm.
and just explaining why everything kind of is lowest common denominator-y, it's we're all just trying to stick out. Talk a little bit more about that, and where do you think that's going in a decade?
Yeah, I think so. Kyle Chayka from the New Yorker wrote Filter World, came out just over a year ago, and I was just so deeply affected by this book. And it's not even about restaurants, it's a little bit of a retrospective of social media and how it's changed the way that we discover things and appreciate things. But the easy example is the coffee shop that looks the same no matter where you are in the world. 5 years ago, it was like Edison bulbs and wood. It's evolved a little bit, but we're all evolving together.
Yeah.
So when I talked to Kyle, I really kind of pressed him, like, what does this mean for restaurants, right? And the thing that he did really well, and then the conversation pushed me to do, was to connect this algorithmic success of whatever is popular rising to the top, being regurgitated, refed, remixed a little bit, connect that to the capital and access that a chef or restaurateur is getting from, say, a big name developer in New York that has a ton of square footage on the ground floor of a brand new glass tower and wants to make sure that there's a line out the door every night. You're not going to take a risk on some new experimental concept, however exciting you may think it is. You're going to do the thing from the big design firm that has the wood with the stuff and the plants and the safe menu, right? And so I see a lot of algorithmic of the way that the algorithms are affecting our restaurants and menus to just be a lot of the same. It's safety. And I think that I am just a little worried about that. I want to make sure that there's still room for creativity and risk, not only because I believe in the art and creativity, but just because that's how progress happens. So I want to make sure that when I'm talking about these algorithms, it's balanced very much by the practical implication of what's happening. And the practical implication is things are becoming the same because there's money and capital involved.
Ironically, I think it's the ones with the big money and capital. When you said that, the first restaurant that came up to my mind was the Grill in New York, right? I mean, maybe the most expensive restaurant to build, right, ever, right? And I almost feel like yes, I totally get it that there's a tension to lead on the prime rib because everyone loves prime rib, but they can still maybe have the luxury of kind of trying new things out a little bit more than, let's say, a bunch of local mom and pops in my area here where all the menus kind of look the same and no one's really trying to innovate,
Yeah.
I saw a lot of this too. I grew up in a family of Chinese American restaurant owners, and it's weird how all of a sudden at some year, all American Chinese restaurants across America flipped a switch and they all decided they would have General Tso's chicken. Yeah,
this is that's the first principles example of exactly what I'm talking about. It's but then it became an American thing, right? And then it's expected. And then if you don't have it and you don't have it priced a certain way, it doesn't work.
And not only that, I think that it kind of snowballs on itself because it reinforces a certain expectation that maybe wasn't there before on the clientele. Just the idea of Americanized sushi. There's a lot of people that Americanized sushi. That's the only sushi they've ever had. If you put them in front of a honest Japanese restaurant, they would be I don't recognize this as sushi, right? And so, so I think it just kind of spirals. So how do you break that? I don't know. What were the insights? Any? Is it literally black swan event? You can't really predict it, or how can you crack through that?
Hold on. Kyle had a really good answer to that, and I'm gonna look it up.
Well, while you're looking, I mean, hasn't the restaurant space always been a copycat marketplace? I feel like if something's working, you see. I just remember 20 years ago, there was everyone doing kind of everyone would kind of. I'm trying to remember what it was, but there's concepts that just go from place to place and it happens and then they burn out over a couple of years. It seems like that's always happened in the restaurant space.
Yeah, I think so. But when there's literally no, you can't open a restaurant in San Francisco because you need $5 million of investment, right? And you're just, I don't know. It feels different to me now. It feels different to me because
when you walk through the Mission though, there's lots of
not
cool
anymore.
Concepts that.
Have you been here?
Yeah, I walked through the last year. There's a lot of cool taco chains and burrito chains that I don't think took $5 million to open.
There are no chains in the Mission.
Not chains, but mom and pops.
There's
lots of mom and pops that didn't take $5 million to open. So these are opening in places like the Mission. I feel like.
Okay, fair. I'll give you that. But how are they different from each other? They're all the same, relatively.
Right. I guess it just doesn't take. A chain may take a lot of money, but I feel like a mom and pop with a cool idea is opening in places, lots of different cities.
Well, do you guys? I have this working theory. See what you guys think of it. That you know that scene in The Devil Wears Prada where like Meryl Streep makes fun of Anne Hathaway's like sweater as like that frumpy blue sweater, and she's like, "Oh, I saw that sweater at some Valentino show 5 years ago," and you know. Before you know it, it's in the bargain bin at Old Navy for you too. Do you think that dynamic exists in restaurants where like an Alinea or French Laundry is doing something and then, I mean, Dave Chang's pork bun is a great example. Like, I think I saw like a pork bun at like an Applebee's menu, right? And that thing started at this, you know, the OG Momofuku. Like, do you think there's any validity to that? Like, does that trickle down style kind of thing happen in restaurants? And is that maybe the way that new life gets breathed into the mom and pops?
I mean, I'm sure, like, I think any good chef or restaurant's taking inspiration from every place that they can take inspiration from. And certainly there, I mean, that's just like a trend, right? Like to have a pork bun, steam buns, whatever it is. Like, I don't know, like there's whole reports on menu trends. And I don't know. Like, I'm sorry, what is your question exactly in that? Like that, is it happening? Is it a good thing? Is it?
Yeah, well, no, it just is it potentially the way that like if a mom and pop is just so risk averse they can't really, you know, innovate, like they're probably just going to look to whoever's like two or three steps above them to kind of look for cues, right? You know? Because yeah, like if I'm looking for something new and I'm an Asian restaurant, I can either go on a pork bun because everyone's talking about it from Momofuku, or I can go off the reservation and like make some other like kanji dish, right? If I got to pay the rent, I'm going for that pork bun thing, right? So I'm
Right.
just yeah trying to
So
think
is
about
that
like
good though? Like, is that it as a diner? Do you want that? I guess is what I'm asking. Like, I'm kind of like I'm worried about forward. I'm thinking about forward progress, right? And
hmm
like, and when it would become a problem, I would say is if you can't open a restaurant without putting something on the menu that like plays good on the internet, like that kind of that it just that just sucks. I think I don't like that. I think
yeah
that's not good. I want to go back to this other question you were
yeah
asking
yeah
of
oh
like
yeah
basically is there good news? And
chocolates yep
I found what I was looking for.
yeah let's hear it.
So when I asked Kyle, is there good news here? Because it was a little bit doom and gloom, this conversation. And to be fair, we were having it in January 2024. It was freezing cold, whatever. But he says that I think people's boredom is good news. We're getting better at identifying when our space has been optimized for the internet, if it feels like it's talking down to us or something similar. So there's apathy towards strategies that play, solidly just toward feeding an algorithm that's driven by what you see online, was his read of the situation.
You mentioned I think in that article like the prevalence of like the neon sign that has like the city name on it that everyone wants to take a picture of.
Yeah.
And I was just in Miami and I stayed at a place and right downstairs there's a big Miami neon sign. And I'm like, I think it's extending to like neighborhoods and towns. Like West Loop of Chicago is I think a great example because like I grew up in the Midwest, so I've been going to Chicago forever. And like the West Loop wasn't anything there for the longest time. And then all of a sudden, like all the cool bars and restaurants are there too. There's a certain vibe of it in some of the places where it kind of feels just manufactured, you know?
Yeah.
Like it all looks like a Sweetgreen, kind of.
Yeah.
S,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
Yes, and
Yes.
that's just an observation.
Yeah, that's
but
like
that's what I mean.
exactly
It's
what I'm talking
scaling.
about.
It's totally scaling beyond just like menu trends, you know? It's life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to be clear. I don't think necessarily this is all bad. Like,
Yeah.
when I went to Toto Santos with my husband, I took a picture of us in front of the Toto Santos
Yeah.
letters,
Yeah.
it's just it's more of it's an observation. It is, right? And I want there to be room, as someone who appreciates the art of a good restaurant, I just want there to be room for more stuff, not necessarily just the stuff that plays good on a screen. So
Yeah, so it's like how do we make it a little bit safer for people to take risks conceptually and culinary wise? Because it seems like we're at a point in the industry where the margin of error is so low, and you can't afford to take a risk. Is really what I'm getting out of this. Okay, so Mike and I talked a lot about kind of the ongoing conversation is like digital stuff into restaurants, right? Like there was an article I referenced where Pete Wells, I think it was, the article was titled, "I reviewed restaurants for 12 years. They've changed and not for the better." The too long, didn't read kind of summary is just saying like, how much is too much technology in a restaurant? What do you make of that? And like, where's your thought on
what do I make of his column?
His column, but also just the idea generally of like, where's your line? We were talking, Mike Wolf and I, about, I'm on team non-QR code menu. He's on team QR code menu. I know.
I have never spoken about a topic more than the QR code menu. I've been quoted in the New York Times about this.
I know.
It's
a meme.
I think to be clear, Pete Wells, extremely accomplished, respected critic for perhaps one of the most influential papers in history, spent his last column whining about how technology has ruined restaurants. And, my goodness, I think that it is, of course, was a professional diner, right? And that is an observation. It is a fair one, because that's his perspective. I think I did write about this. This was last spring, right? It's not just the restaurant industry. I think I argued like, but these businesses, they're restaurants, they're businesses. They don't operate in a vacuum. It ignored. He was like ignoring the reality of operating in like this dynamic, challenging, evolving situation. I think like a third of his tenure at the Times was after 2020. Like that was hardly normal operating conditions. And it's easy to forget that. Like, yes, restaurants have changed coming out of COVID. We're 5 years post the onset. Like they have fundamentally changed and some things are sticking. Like we were still, when he left, it was still real shaky ground. Like these things had not been widely established as like forever precedent kind of thing. So I obviously was kind of like, really? Are you serious? Like this is the thing that you're choosing to go out on. I think a lot of the criticism of like he did a lot of criticizing of the service, like that, right? That it was like more transactional now and less human centric, and the hospitality was gone. And then he got into an internet fight with Will Guidara. Like then, I think what did I say? Oh, well, I wrote about them, Will and Fast Company. And I said he was the heir apparent to the legacy of being nice, started by Danny Meyer. And like, he got into like an argument with him that was like, oh, so now you care about hospitality, but your reviews before like never mentioned the hospitality. They just mentioned the food. So it ushered in a very important conversation about what makes a restaurant work. And I found that piece, well, your feelings and observations are valid, was like, this is the reality that these New York restaurants have found themselves operating in, right? Like propose a better alternative. And don't just include the way that the diner feels, propose a better alternative that works. The margins are thin, they're getting worse. It's harder. Rent is getting higher. Food is getting more expensive. People are not tolerating menu prices. They don't tolerate service charges. They don't tolerate whatever other like line items you want to put on there to like give your staff insurance or what. I live in San Francisco. We have a gazillion fees on our restaurant checks. So it felt out of touch to me, right? Like, yes, it is making my phone and this QR code and like doing this, looking at my phone while we're dining is making the experience worse. Yeah, 100% it is. You know why it's doing that? Like for all of these other reasons that are completely out of control of this person, this business that's trying to operate. So I obviously had really strong feelings about it. And is there a line? You asked for me. I'm kind of like, you know what? If a restaurant has a QR code in the year 2025, like there's a reason. I'll just do it. Yeah.
I also feel like the professional reviewers can be a little too precious. And it's like when you look at movie reviewers and then like the Rotten Tomato scores, like they're oftentimes very different. And like what the actual people going to movies like, oftentimes they'll like something that critics hate. And so I feel like there's oftentimes a disconnect between someone like him and what consumers actually embrace.
I saw this morning, I mean, we're recording this like mid-February. And this was like a disembodied post on social media. So I don't know exactly what it was in reference to. I'll have to look it up. But it was, Tom Sietsema from the Washington Post talking about unionized labor at unionized restaurants, service is worse. But like, then it was like footnote, like, I'm in a union and I believe in fair wages, but unionized restaurants service is worse. And I don't know what that was in context of. I only saw it. So to be fair, like I said, I'm repeating this out of context, but it's that kind of thing. Like, yes, valid observations are, and like, I'm glad that you support a living wage for restaurants, but can we just like take a step back and acknowledge what the reality of the situation is?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't live in a place, like we don't live in a time where there's like fair living wages that people, for many service employees. And like, yeah, like that's an issue. I don't think that it's that people are unionizing to be like dicks to their customers.
Yeah.
So it's just things like that. It to speak to the preciousness, like none of this is happening in a vacuum, and it's just disingenuous to make those kinds of pronouncements without acknowledging the larger reality, in my opinion. And this is why I have my own newsletter.
Outside of the QR code, is the tip and the tip discussion like the other big thing you're getting questions about? Because I imagine that is.
Yeah, I think California, we don't have a tip minimum, so it's like a little bit less here. But I mean, obviously, like the tipping and tipped wages, and now because I cover policy, this no tax on tips proposal from the federal government, which both candidates for president from major parties said they supported during the election. That is a big one, right? Like, talk about things like not happening in a vacuum. Like, no taxes on tips sounds amazing for tipped workers, but then you look at the research and the experts that are saying, well, actually, and then how it's, how many other employees or employers, companies are going to push to have service workers be on a tip model so that the business is on the hook less, and then the people it's just going to entrench tipping culture further into this country, when a lot of people are saying, hey, like, tipping culture is not great. We don't know what's better. This is really hard to dig out of. But like, so yes, I do get a lot of questions. I don't have any answers about that one. But from a policy perspective, I'm absolutely like very curious what will be implemented, and what kind of effect that will have on business owners and hourly workers.
Yeah. I think the thing with restaurants, and this comes back to the Pete thing, because I'm with you too. I felt like that was like, really, dude, that's your mic drop like post? Yeah. Like, okay, this is odd. But it's also like, there's just such a delta between different restaurant experiences that, even me here on my high horse, like, I don't like QR code menus. I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to like a fast food thing or like a Sweetgreen or something like that, I love digital ordering because I need to get in and out there, right? But like, date night, I don't really want to like stare at our phones all the time. Yeah. I just think it's like, it's not like, like Apple releases an iOS update and it's the same for everyone. So yeah, you can critique it because that change has been scaled across everything.
Yeah.
But like, there's just so much, like, it's almost like, do you like digital in restaurants or not? It's like, well, it depends, right?
Yeah.
It depends on how I'm eating.
There's a pizza place in Marin County, north of the Golden Gate, that has QR codes on the table for pizza and beer, and they have a play structure. And I bring my children, they're 6 and 8, and they play, and I use the QR code, and they bring the stuff to the table, and it's fine, and it works, and it's great, and it's hospitable, and it's perfect. And it's like, this, if I had to flag, first of all, like, the poor servers, they would never, like, there are just kids it's like Chuck E. Cheese outside, right, in Marin. And so it's like fancy Chuck E. Cheese. And so there are ways that great tech is really being more hospitable. And that sounds like a Danny or a Will line, but it's true. Like, good technology can make the experience better for all of us. It is not a universal good, bad, whatever. It's also like, that's just where it's going. That's where it's going. Restaurants are getting, like, they're going to the extremes, and the middle, like, full service is shrinking. So, well,
I think of all the glob of digital tech in restaurants is like, it's kind of like a new instrument, like restaurant owners haven't had it's like year 5 of you playing the saxophone. Nobody expects you to nail it, and so we've had all these other things. And so it's funny you mentioned the Chuck E. Cheese, because Mike and I were just talking about chains and Chuck E. Cheese and how we would love to see a modernized Chuck E. Cheese. Like, someone needs to Red Lobster that brand and like update the show. Like, if not animatron, something else. But like, hey, I'm interested.
I would take the animatronics. There's an Instagram account where this guy works at the last Chuck E. Cheese that had like the actual animatronics. Like, and so there's a few left, like one or two left. But
I was terrified of those as a child.
I know they're kind of, but now I love them.
Now you love
nostalgia.
that.
Yeah, it's great. I don't
Because it's nostalgic. It's nostalgic.
We also you alluded to your kids. I was also saying about like, the idea of like automation in restaurants, back of house, but then like front of house, like bare robotics type stuff. How my daughter first saw her first food robot at a Heidi Lau hot pot, and she thought it was the most amazing thing, like delightful thing ever, because it was like kind of anthropomorphized into like a kitty, and it had like kitty ears, and like you pet it and it meows. Like, have your kids run into a robot in the wild? And how does that? How'd that
We've
go?
had one of those. We went to very uncharacteristically went to a like a family resort in Europe last summer, and it had a dining room, and they had one of the kitty cat robots that was bussing. It was for bussing tables, and they chased that thing down and they cleaned our table off. Man, they were fighting over who got to put the last fork on the tray, and like, that is pure upside for me there. The novelty of something like that. I've been talking about robotics in restaurants because I'm working on a piece about them forthcoming in print, so it'll be out months from now. The novelty factor is still significant, but exciting. I mean, I live in San Francisco. We have Waymos, right? Self-driving cars, AVs. My children like die every time we get to go into a Waymo. They are so excited. They are like bouncing off the walls. We cannot believe it. And it's funny too that 6 and 8, like they both experienced the same thing that I did, which was like, oh my God, this is weird. Yeah. Like my 8-year-old was like, can I sit on the other side of the car next time? I don't like seeing the steering wheel move, Yeah. So it's fun to watch them interact with that kind of stuff. And it's fun to think about what will be their normal, I guess, when they're 20 years hence. I don't know.
Well, that's what I mean. I think it's like the technology moves fast, way faster than people can assimilate it into their lives, right? Like we were talking earlier about like self-checkout lines in grocery, and we've had those for a really long time, like I watched my little Target have 4 of them. Now they have like 16 of them, but that was over like a 7 or 8 year like time frame. And so I almost wonder, like, some of these things that people are quote unquote scared of talking about, like, oh, all service workers are replaced by robots, yada yada yada. I kind of wonder, like, what are the opportunities for that when you've got a whole generation, our kids' age, that are older, that don't have the same hangups we did, because like we're all born analog, we're going to die digital, right? But like for some kids, like my daughter's 4, she thinks having a kitty robot in a Chinese restaurant is normal, and so I feel like she's just going to go further down the curve. And I don't know, like, what's your sense from talking to some of these people? Like, how fast do you think this is coming, or do you think it's like self-checkout, where it's like it's going to be a slow burn for a really long time?
That's a good question. I mean, I like joined this conversation by saying I was at Sweetgreen all day yesterday, so I'm trying to like think past just that conversation with the leaders of Sweetgreen that are building out robotic automated restaurants. I think in certain circumstances, like a Sweetgreen or like obviously Chipotle is investing in robotics significantly. Like that's here. Like it's happening. The rollout, like Sweetgreen, I think they said half their pipeline is going to be infinite kitchen locations in 2025. And
my gosh,
I don't know. Don't quote me on that. They haven't reported earnings yet. I think there was like a casual conversation. But they have said, like, it's a huge part of their future success is this kind of automation. So I guess maybe it's that the restaurants that are being built, restaurants in the future will be built with this stuff already inside of it, considered into the economic model. Like, it's not that it's replacing a human cost. It's just like, that's just how it will operate.
Well, I don't know if that
answers your question.
Yeah, it's interesting that the CEO of ex-CEO Chipotle, the founder, is basically starting a robot restaurant, right, Colonel?
Yeah, it's closed right now.
Yeah, I do think you have to be careful though, because especially when you're bringing automation into places. So I think places dependent, where people may resent it. I think the Luddite movement is going to continue to grow, and so you saw Andrew Simmons bring robotics into an old established Italian restaurant in San Diego vicinity. The entire community rejected him. And and some of the former employees started talking about how he's replacing people with robots on social media. And so I think it has to be a careful integration, and you have to kind of think about where you're bringing it into so you don't make people around you mad.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, like I was talking to an investor in the space, right? And they were saying it's, yes, the easy narrative is that they're replacing people, because in like a black and white sense, they are replacing human labor because it's robots that do labor. But these people don't exist for a lot of operators. They can't find them. They're like, it's not actually, no one's losing their job because of a robot. I don't know. I feel like we've had these conversations a lot. We always kind of end up with the same result, where it's like, yeah, it has to be measured. It's probiotic. Front of house robots. I mean, we're talking about like the kitty cat, but for the most part, front of house robotics haven't really taken off. It's a lot of back of house stuff.
And I think the curve on there is a lot more difficult, because on the back of the house it's already filled with robots. The dishwasher's a robot.
Dishwasher's a robot. Yeah.
The blender's a robot, right? And I think like
the oven. Mm-hmm.
I think so. Yeah, I think sometimes in like the media, like people kind of run with this idea of like they always go to the 2001 Space Odyssey, like, you know, a humanoid robot kind of thing, like dancing around. And I don't. Yeah, you're right. Like the Kato robot is just a giant box making guacamole. You know, like how's that any different than a food processor, right? And so. But yeah,
it's like a really gifted food processor that can take the peel off. Like, it's great. Who wouldn't want that? That's amazing.
Who wouldn't want that? Yeah. Like, I almost think that's like more, injects more humanity into a kitchen, right? Because it kind of frees up the person that was doing a lot of quote unquote inhumane work to like do thing. Like the thing about the Hadi Lao was that because this like kitty robot was doing the food writing for our server, she was like the greatest server I've had in a long time. We had such a great experience, right? Because she was like, so blissed out and not stressed.
I mean, I'll tell you, like, I had this conversation yesterday with Jonathan Neiman, CEO of Sweetgreen, and he said this in earnings call, so this isn't any kind of breaking news, but employees at the Sweetgreen Infinite Kitchen restaurants are arguably happier as measured by rates of turnover. And you know, their data is very limited because it's new, but they do have a handful of retrofitted locations where they changed from a full service, I'm making air quotes, full service Sweetgreen to a digital touchscreen robot assist, machine assist model. And the staff is really excited about it. And they are able to spend more time like just looking up, you know, engaging with people. And I'm always very skeptical as a journalist of somebody saying that, especially somebody like on the business side or like from the robot company. You're like, oh yeah,
of course,
it's a great line. But this, I mean, their data is showing it. They say like there are store managers, whatever their name for it is, I forget, that ask, they're excited to be trained on this. Like they want to do it. They want to learn how to do it. They want to be in with this new technology. And I think that is extremely anecdotal, but it does speak to the ability of a machine to do the literal heavy lifting and leave the human jobs to the humans. And I'm excited to see that proliferate. I am less excited about any kind of future automat, whatever it's going to be.
So. People keep trying to make that an idea. I remember that was there in New York City on St. Mark's in like the early 2000s for like 3 years.
A minute.
You remember that place? Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. I thought it was like, this is awesome. And my parents were like, we had that when I was a kid. I was like, what? Yeah, it's always like that. Well, and I think that anecdote about you saying like the employees there are excited to learn how to use it, that checks out with any technology in any, like in office building even, like people still will go do a seminar on Excel to learn how to use the tool better, you know? And I think it just ups everyone's game, and I think people will like that. So we know you got to run in a little bit, but there's a question I like to ask everybody. I want to ask this to you, Kristen, is if you had a crystal ball for the next 10 years in restaurants, what would you ask it?
I mean, is the restaurant industry still viable?
Good question.
Like, do you exist? 10 years is a really long time. You know, I think I'm just really interested to see, like, I just want, are you happy? Are people happy? Are restaurants excited? Are restaurateurs still excited? Like, are we pumped to open a new spot? Like, the reason that I continue this work is because I just love talking to the people that are making the change and like doing the thing. It's so cool. It's so fun. They're so creative and have such strong points of view and really thoughtful ideas and about how things work. And, for me, especially like, college student, New York City, really, I moved from the suburbs, like experiencing this third place, air quotes again, for the first time, just like, wow, like this exists. I can't believe this exists. So I think, like gosh, I hope that is still the humanity, right? Like the person to person connection and humanity is still top of mind at the kind of restaurants that it matters. I think convenience is awesome. I love it. Great. Like, give me a pickup, give me this, give me delivery. Wonderful. But like, is there still space for human connection outside of a screen, outside of your house, in a place that facilitates that kind of behavior? And do we want it? I don't know. Like, are we still going to like each other in 10 years? There's an asteroid, right? Like, are we going to be here? I don't know. So, I guess what I would want to say is like, what are the high points in 10 years from now? That's what I would want to know. Like, what are we still excited about?
Well, and I think you said, like, are we happy? Maybe that's the question, because that kind of is agnostic of any technology or anything like that. Like, maybe as long as we're happy, who cares if it's all high tech or all analog or something in between, right? I guess. I don't know.
My ultimate, like, I view everything through the diner experience, consumer experience. And that is how technology affects it, how the back end's working, what's in back of house, how many people are staffed, how much are they getting paid, blah, blah, blah. How does that all translate into the diner experience? So like, that's the way I think of a restaurant. I don't think about it as the back. I think about it as the front and how it's making the people, like the diners, consumers feel. So for me, it's all about experience, no matter what. And that's what I'm most excited to learn more about. Yeah.
And if we lose the unifying experience of eating together, like we're in sorry shape. Because I always feel like that was the one thing where everyone loves food, and people get together over meals. But I hope we don't have blue restaurants and red restaurants in the future. That'd be really sad.
Oh,
or do we already have that?
I think that's already happening.
We have Starbucks. Starbucks and Black Rifle Coffee, right? Like, what else?
Sad.
What else? Yeah, I know. It's tough.
Yeah. But also, like, I know we're at time, but like, I just was listening to Travis Kalanick on the All In podcast, like, against my better judgment, but I get really frustrated when it's like his ultimate goal is like, I want to make restaurant food cheaper than going to the grocery store in order to optimize, blah, blah. And I'm like, what are you optimizing for? Like, you're like, it's like, I understand this in theory. It is a lucrative optimization practice to insert efficiency. This is another loaded word in these times, but like, insert efficiency into everything. And perhaps we don't need to necessarily have everything be max efficient all the time in order to be optimized. Like, optimization and efficiency don't have to be the same thing. And I don't think they are in restaurants. And that's what I love about them so much.
Well said, Kristen Hawley. Go check out Expedite. It's one of my favorite pubs out there to check out.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And
thank you, Kristen.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
So what'd you think of that with Kristen? Covered a lot of ground.
Always appreciate her insights. She's been doing this as long as anyone, and she creates great access. I've been trying to talk to the Chipotle guys for a while.
Sweetgreen?
Sweetgreen guys for a while.
Yeah.
I apologize. But yeah, Sweetgreen guys. But so I always am super appreciative of her. I usually have her come to CES and moderate our restaurant tech panel. So a big fan.
I have not been to an Infinite Kitchen. Have you?
So I was going to bring it up. We ran out of time, but I went to Boston like 5 years ago with my son. This is before the pandemic. And I went to Spice, which became the technology that became Infinite Kitchen. And so it's pretty funny. And I've talked about this before. Like, we're in Boston, it's the land of the founding fathers and so much historic stuff there. And my son, he's okay with it. It's cool. But what he really liked, the coolest thing for him was the robotic restaurant. So, so I've only been to Spice, the predecessor to essentially an Infinite Kitchen.
I think that's such a common kid experience or young person experience to kind of be enamored with this. Like, there's something in there that's like, I don't know, they don't get, they don't have all this jaded feeling built up in them, like some adults do.
And again, they were pretty aggressive and early on with the kiosk based ordering. Also, my son was a little bit of an outlier in that he was captain of his high school robotics team and like went to national championships with his robotics team. So like he loves robots. So that was kind of maybe a robot kid thing.
I still love the fact that they have those kinds of things. They didn't have that when I was growing up. This is my older middle-aged man stump speech. Like,
hooray for mathletes and like supporting the kids who don't make the football team. My kid switched from football to robotics competitions. So he was
wow,
definitely,
really?
yeah.
My gosh, that's crazy. Yeah, I just think it's gonna be normal. I don't know. I think stuff like that has to have a cultural normalization before it can really like run wild, you know? Like we forget like and also just everything has to fall into place. Like we forget like, we all have iPads and, tablets now, but like like Apple came out with a tablet like way back in the 90s, the Newton.
Yeah. I forgot
And
about that. Yeah.
not only were people not ready for it because they had just barely gotten accustomed to computers, but like the infrastructure wasn't there for it, you know? There's no software developers to create apps for it. There's no Wi-Fi. There's none of that stuff, right? And so I kind of feel like food robots, kitchen robots, I'm all for that. I think there's already the ground layer for that to happen already because it already has been happening. But I think the dining room is quite a different thing, you know? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we're just gonna have little kitty food runners for the next decade for a while till
And maybe we what we saw the past 10 years was the Newton or Palm Pilot of food robots. I feel like we saw a whole bunch of these food robots come out which were just repurposed industrial robot arms. They bought a robot arm for $10,000 and built a startup around it. None of those succeeded. I mean, you've seen to a certain extent Flippy get a little bit of traction, but I don't know how much legs that has. I feel like the ones that have worked are the purpose-built second generation robotics like Spice, which became Infinite Kitchen. We've seen a few other of these that have done well. Picnic for pizza robots. So not just taking a robot arm and trying to build a food robot, then trying to get venture funding. That doesn't work. But I think the newer ones that are built purposefully for food make sense.
yeah. I saw that in my time in CPG as well too, like working at Chobani, because like all these yogurt filling machines, they're all custom built and they cost millions and millions of dollars, right? And so, it's clear we've had robots in food for a very long time. CPG pushes the envelope there because you have to make everything as good. You have to do it with a robot, right? I guess it's just a really slow like price performance curve that we're just kind of matriculating through, you know? It's one thing that occurred to me too is like that maybe like restaurants like the Chipotles and Sweetgreens of the world, they create enough demand for robotics of all kinds in restaurants to the point where like maybe Bear decides I'm going to build a new factory and this factory is going to crank out these robots for 40% less per unit than it was before in our smaller, just basically getting economies of scale. And then like, could that be kind of like the thing that breaks open that market for, mom and pops, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. What hasn't worked was the venture funded robot / restaurant concept where essentially people are trying to be a full stack, get a bunch of venture funding, create their own robot, and then start a restaurant.
but you mean like the
Now,
fully automated restaurant kind of thing?
yeah, I think it's a different thing to be a technology builder and building robotics and then being a restaurant operator. I feel like, Sweetgreen swooped in and bought Spice. Essentially, probably Aqua hired them, a bunch of engineers, but they acquired that probably because the company's going to go out of business. What was that big pizza robot startup that raised like $200 million from SoftBank and had the
I know what you're
trucks and
talking
stuff?
about. Yeah, I know what you're talking
Like
about.
like that failed spectacularly. So I
That's a
just feel like,
lot of money. That's a disgustingly large amount of money. Jesus.
yeah, it also felt like a lot of money going into what looked like a 1.0 food robot. And then why do we want to put robotics and automation in the mobile truck? I feel like we also saw that with Wonder, and they had to kind of pivot from that completely. They had this like cook on the go concept. They moved away from that and essentially become like a ghost kitchen company. So I feel like you need to separate automation and then running a restaurant. Those are two different businesses.
Yeah, I think I thought the thesis for those was like we save a lot by not having a physical space. It's basically a glorified food truck, and we're just doubling down on efficiency by cooking it as you go. But like again, I don't know. Was that really? I mean, Domino's can get you a pizza in 30 minutes. Is that really, you know, the problem, right? People needed the pizza in 5 minutes. I don't know. There's a
And I feel
great
like,
There's a great Homer
yeah,
Simpson moment where I feel like so much of this colors like our expectations around tech, where he's getting or no, Mo buys a like a deep fryer that's like this super crazy high-end deep fryer, and Mo goes, he's showing it to Homer, and he goes, "Oh, this can deep fry a buffalo in 60 seconds." And Homer goes, "Oh, but I wanted it in 30 seconds." Or he says, no, "Oh, but I want it now." Yeah, that's what he says. "Oh, but I want it now." And I feel like there's just so much, "Oh, I want it now" kind of stuff. Because like we get used to stuff very easily, you know?
yeah.
Um,
To I also feel like to succeed as a venture funded company nowadays, it's going to be very hard as a restaurant because you almost have to be a hit. You'd almost have to hit Chipotle style scale and returns if you raised $500 million. Whereas if you start a robot company and then sell it to every restaurant company in America, like you can maybe make that a business, but you can't build your own robot and become a restaurant chain. You're just never going to make the money back.
All right, welcome, Elizabeth Tilton, hailing from New Orleans, CEO and founder of Oyster Sunday, a hospitality studio. Elizabeth, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, Mike. Good to see you again.
Hey,
You'll have to be more
That's
specific. We got two
true.
mics here
yeah,
today.
Hi,
We
exactly.
got two
Mike.
mics.
I know.
To both. Hi,
I stole
Mikes.
Mike Lee's hello from Elizabeth and said
Yeah.
hi.
Today is BOGO mics here. So thanks for joining us. And today's topic's about the future of restaurants and all that entails. But maybe before we kind of look forward, like let's step back a little bit and just tell us a little about what is Oyster Sunday and why did you create it?
Yeah. So Oyster Sunday, as you mentioned, we say it's a hospitality studio. We are a consulting company that really declare ourselves to be a corporate office for independent hospitality operators. So for us, that means restaurants, bars, hotels, breweries, wineries, you name it, anything that touches hospitality. And we do everything in the back office. So we do finance and analytics, operations, human resources, marketing, and branding. So we really know that every team has unbelievable skill sets and talent, but to ask them to do all of that as small business is a lot. So we kind of come in to really round out their business and their skill sets.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil your Easter egg, but I always appreciated the fact that the initials for Oyster Sunday also stand for operating
It
system.
does, yes. OS.
Was that intentional?
It was mostly intentional. Actually, we originally it was because when I was a cook myself in pastry down in New Orleans after I didn't go to medical school and decided to cook, and for me the quintessential leisure was champagne and oysters when I had a day off here and there. And when the name came about, it was a natural extension of that. And then a friend of ours, actually Marnie, brought up, goes, "Oh, that means operating system, right?" And I was like, "It does now."
Mm,
So yes,
It does
great.
now.
I spoiled
It
it. I
does.
have to give her all credit. She's clever.
When you dropped out of medical school, I just cut Kevin Jung, who works at Noma. He dropped out of college and he's now in Noma. Did you disappoint your parents?
They're both doctors. My mom's a
Oh, so maybe.
pediatric neurologist, and my father's a cardiologist. So I'm pretty sure they thought I went rogue. But I really do believe there's this innate willingness to serve others that follows through hospitality and follows its way through medicine. And to me, that's what I knew I was born to do, and it just manifests itself differently when I decided not to take that path. And but yeah, I always wanted to be a pediatric oncologist. Like that was my kind of calling. And then I just found a passion for food, and here we are.
I had a similar background. I was pre-med for precisely one semester, wanting to
That
be
counts.
a wanting to be a surgeon, and I still cut meat for a while, but just differently. Little bit differently. So Oyster Sunday, like that, like I mean, I think that that operating system is very meaningful because I think it seems like you really saw this need that I don't know, restaurant owners just like kind of failing or struggling to manage all that back office stuff because they were just putting all they had out onto the line and on the dining room? Like, what was the need really look like from your point of view?
Yeah, it's so I actually wrote down the business plan back in 2012 when I was working at Momofuku, and I it was my first exposure to a corporate office for for just a restaurant group. And I'm sitting here seeing, all of these key functions and core competencies are aggregated to a corporate office that are serving multiple brick and mortars. And you have, brilliant chefs and brilliant general managers and all these things, but there's not enough time in the day, there's not enough resources available to really optimize and to make these businesses that are living organisms, to kind of go back to our science conversation, that are breathing and evolving and like amoebic, that are filling the voids. And so they're always changing. But if you have these core competencies, it makes a big difference. So in 2012, I wrote down the business plan and sat on it for 7 years before bringing it to life. And in 2019, and I really do think that that's what it's meant to be, is that there's over 420,000 independent restaurants in this nation, and all of them need those services. And so instead of being in-house at one restaurant group, we could roll it out and service multiples coast to coast. And we actually have worked with restaurants also internationally.
Got it. Got it. So if you're sitting in the point of view of a restaurant operator, an owner, GM, or whatever, like what's the landscape look like today of what that's like? And maybe like contrast that with like how is it different than 5, 10 years ago? What's new on the battlefield that people have to kind of face that wasn't really always there before?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I would say, yeah,
Everything.
everything is new. I would say it's interesting because when I started my culinary career, it was, in 2009, 2010. And at that point, it's like the advent of Instagram, like these restaurants were becoming not just brick and mortars, they're becoming these lifestyles. They're evolving and
Hmm.
becoming all these alternative revenue streams of test kitchens and media labs and all of these things. And I think that has become even more and more refined over the last 15
Hmm.
years. And I think it's almost a necessity that a restaurant of itself has to have such a clear point of view of what it stands for. And what it stands for can mean the type of food it services, the service style, the labor modeling, whatever that means, and or what you stand for environmentally. Like there's a lot of things of what that means for people. But I think the consumer over the last, let's say, 15 years, and even we'll go over to the last 5, because I think COVID is inevitable to talk about a little bit, is there's so much more knowledge around food and food systems. And I think the consumer is more informed. And so the expectations are getting higher in a different way. And the ease of access and the ease of consumption is getting more and more palatable. It's getting more refined. And so I think that's causing restaurants to have to differentiate further and further from each other and to stand for something.
Yeah.
And so I'll kind of start with that as my first bullet.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked with Kristen a lot about kind of just the algorithmization of uh quite literally the digital feeds of like what people see. And it almost feels like you've really got to figure out a way how to stand out. But also there's also comfort in like just optimizing like how you're operating for the algorithm, which sounds a little dystopic. Like
Yeah.
like, sometimes people don't. I remember that Dave Chang lamented once that he's like something to the effect of like, oh gosh, the pork bun, because it's like,
Yeah. He's talked about
it's
taking
the
it off the
thing that kind
menu.
of,
Yeah. When I was there, he
and that's
was,
what I
yeah.
mean. But I imagine there's a lot of other restaurants that have their own pork bun where they're like, I put this thing as a lark, and now everyone loves it, and I can't not get away from it now. Like, do you see kind of that homogenization at all in the restaurants? That yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's this kind of these two conflicting factors where there's the kind of creative, let's use that example of a restaurant that's sit down, that's evolving all the time, the menu's evolving, and they have these capstone and these kind of, traditional or capstone original items that they're serving that are desirable by their consumers, but all they want to do is destroy them and move on.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because I always joke that, like, we're pirates out in the ocean. We don't like to be confined to boxes. So when all of a sudden the consumer knows exactly what they want, they come in for an experience that they have contrived digitally,
Yeah.
or they're coming in for an experience, so it's really, I think it depends on where the operator it's not an easy playing field right now to be on, because it's yeah, go ahead, Mike.
It's like the band, like the Eagles. It's just the fans just want them to play Hotel California
Yes.
or whatever. It's like any band that has to play the same song for 30 years straight, and they just want to play their new album. I feel like that's probably it for a lot of restaurateurs.
Absolutely. And to be on the road for that long, particularly the more time you have as a restaurateur or as an operator, like the more that you get potentially stuck in some of these what an article wrote up about you or what Instagram told you. But I think it's interesting, even just kind of tracking the creative identity. It's like, it used to be Flat Lays, Martha Stewart perfection, and then it went totally the other way where wine was spilled all over the tables for images, and now it's very Gen Z and pop art almost, right? And almost like surrealism. So I think they're always a pendulum swing, and these feedback mechanisms that consumers are looking for, and somewhere in between is the truth.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like this. I mean, what do you make of like the state of innovation going forward, right? Because I think like one of the things like we kind of noticed, especially coming out of the pandemic, was that I seem to sense this kind of rift between corporate-owned chains and indies, where corporate-owned chains in a lot of ways are so much more optimized to weather storms like COVID, right? They've got cash in the bank, they got huge lines of credit, they can kind of keep things going on, whereas like mom and pops are just like struggling really hard, right? And I just wonder like do you see a rift that is there? And do you think that rift is getting wider or narrower as we go forward?
I think that the operator, how about this? I can only come from the vantage point that I have. So I want to kind of preface this by Oyster Sunday. We are very fortunate to have operators who come to us looking for help, right? So I'm going to keep that, because I can't help but look through that prism. But I would say that the operators are coming to us are looking to build financial models and go to the numbers first, then build their business that's informed. And I think that there's a lot more, shooting from the hip that happened 15, 20 years ago in restaurants, that I don't think, between increasing cost inflation, labor modeling, benefits requirements, rent, all these things, that it really needs to be perceived as a stable, sustainable business model to then build a business off of. That's what we preach, is like every time our operators make a decision, it's like, what's the financial implications? Because you could want to protect every single member and get the best property in the best location, but if it's not a viable business given the amount of seats you have, we tell people, when we run models, like we do not recommend you build your business here, given what you want. And I think that we have to kind of, when the stakes are this high, have to kind of come to those realizations.
Yeah. Well, and when you look at kind of like the restaurant model, there's kind of three main pillars of cost, right? There's food, there's real estate, and there's labor. Food, I know we're in an inflationary period right now, and eggs are $1 billion each, right? So that's tough. Real estate in urban areas, obviously, that's super high. But it seems like those two things tend to fluctuate back and forth a little bit more. Like a year from now, we could have super cheap food and super cheap rent. But labor doesn't go backwards in terms of like minimum wages aren't going to be 15 today and 12 next year per se, right? So like how do you kind of look at that? Like what's kind of like the biggest friction and the rub as an operator point of view of how to just kind of deal with just the rising cost of labor, but also like making sure people have enough money to live and get benefits and things like that? Like what's your vantage point on that?
Yeah. One quick note is, I was in a wine shop in New Orleans over the weekend, and they had deviled eggs, and they put market price as the pricing on it. And I thought that was brilliant. So I'm just going to put that out there.
Sign of the times.
I know, sign of the times.
You have to
Market
ask.
Price for eggs.
You have to ask how much the deviled eggs are. You can't afford them.
I know.
Yeah.
I just did a slow clap. I was like, that needs to be recognized.
Masterful.
Indeed. I would say, there's two worlds that are colliding, right? There's this definitely, let's just even talk about the federal mandates, state mandates of minimum wage, right?
Yeah.
There's that we'll address. And the other side of it is that, and kind of going back to our last topic when it comes to COVID, is that we spent, as frontline workers, years basically having to negotiate between compensation and health. Like all of our teams had to choose, right? And they were completely at odds. And I think it drove people out of the industry, and it drove a lot of operators to have to reevaluate what benefits meant. What does a minimum, what does a salary mean? And then what do benefits mean? So I'll kind of address two of those points, but going first to the salary part, There are states that the minimum wage are getting to $15 and $20. They're increasing drastically. I live in Louisiana where it's still 237. So there's still a lot of states that are lagging behind. But I think what those states are requiring operators to do is that what we're running business model, again, going back to financial models, running forecasting, we're going back and saying, okay, your current labor model is the following. Once your minimum wage shifts, let's say it's in a state that's addressing that this year, this is the implications. Now, your current model does not work. Your margins are too slim, right? So then we say, but what will? How do we get a leaner team that has maybe a different service model style or a service, and then it comes to education. So let's say we shift that and we educate your consumers that this is where it's going, or we're building from scratch,
Yeah.
right? We're building an operator from scratch, and we know that this state is going to go up. Let's build towards that now, so you're
Yeah.
ready and can be resilient to that. I think those are very important.
How do you think that affects the labor pool over the next decade? Like just some of the stuff we've seen. And also not to mention, like we've got new administration that's an
Yeah.
immigration hawk that's gonna have a lot of pressure. Like where do you like if you straight line this, like what's it gonna look like as an operator if you're saying like I got a job posting up here and like are we gonna have more people applying for that or less? Like what's that? What do you think is going?
I think we're hearing across the board that labor is hard to find, and to building teams, quality teams are really hard to find. I think that those who are differentiating themselves are investing in other means beyond compensation. Compensation is one part of employment. And I think that now looking at benefits, may that be the traditional ones with health insurance, 401ks, all that jazz, or then fringe benefits as we get into gym memberships and transit. But we're really clear that like the financial implication, the financial salary commitment you're giving has to be sustaining life and has to be committing to people, because all the other 401ks, if you don't have enough to live, that's just, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. How am I going to, how am I going to save for retirement if I can't pay my rent? How am I going to, if I can't pay my rent, how am I going to afford healthcare? And so I think that the operator has to think of it, and it's an unfair burden to put on a lot of independent operators. I would like to address that too, because this is something that came out of, after the World Wars as a benefit. Benefits were seen as a way to employ and to attract labor and recruit, right? And now,
Right.
now it's not only a recruitment tool, it's a retention tool. And people are really,
Yeah.
the next generation, as we have to build this workforce, is not going to be negotiable, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. And it just I'm a child of indie restaurant owners and so I have so much heart for it, but like that's another category where I just see like a Chipotle is prepared for that, you know? They can always just be like, "Hey, you could be rolling the dice on some indie restaurant here as a line cook or you can just come with us, you're going to stable schedule, you're going to do this or that and, benefits and stuff like that." So, I don't know, I just worry about like what that does from like a talent drain in the long term, you know?
Yeah, I think,
If
oh, go ahead, Mike, I'm sorry.
No, that's it. That was it.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear you on that, but I think going back to the kind of quick service like QSRs and fast food, I think that it's built on a model of turnover to kind of, to honestly, in terms of like recruitment, retention, and it's different than independence in some ways. I think that's, how about this? I think independent operators are trying to differentiate themselves. Maybe that's a better way
Sure.
of putting it. Where continuing
Sure.
education looks different than just being onboarded. And I think that those are going to
Sure.
be important as independent operators are trying to recruit good people, and they're both paying $15 an hour. It's going to come down
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
employee's decision of like, what do I stand for?
Yeah.
What works best in my schedule, my childcare, my transit, all these factors come in. But I think the
Yeah.
independent operator has the benefit of not being confined to limitations of a QSR or fast food, operator, and have the ability of building something that is more unique, or maybe for the next 5 years, not from the last
Yeah.
five.
Yeah. Yeah. So, related to that and wages and things like that, Danny Meyer very famously and publicly had about a 5-year experiment where he removed tipping, right? I think he removed it in 15 and put it back in 20. What are sort of the pluses and minuses of that from your point of view? And like, is there another way that we haven't seen yet? I mean, or are we just forever going to be in this cycle of should we do tipping or not tipping?
Yeah, I think it totally comes down to, I think there is a certain amount of geographic location Like, who's your neighbors? Who are you serving? Are you more for are people coming and traveling, and that's your major consumer, or are they your neighbors? Because I think it really comes down to education. Like, is the consumer is the diner who's coming to dine with you informed about the implications of service charge? Because if it's baked into the cost of a meal, I think of the
Yeah.
Nomas, the Bells of the world, out in Los Alamos, that they have a cost. Like, you come in, here's your cost, and then you leave and you're paid for. And I think you're buying up front and there's no surprise. But I do think sometimes where we find operators having to kind of triage or to even just smooth over with diners is that at the end, they're given a 20% fee and they didn't know about it, or they felt they didn't know about it. And so to me, it's not a matter if you can set expectations early and you can get that. And that's a lot of
Yeah.
work on the employer and on the operator.
Yeah.
But I think there are ways of saying it's on your menu when you sit down, you make your reservation, it's identified. Because
Yeah.
I don't think it's not going to work. I think it's just the pushback comes. And for Danny Meyer, I mean, he pulled, and maybe this is a symptom of maybe it's the right time to pull service included during COVID because everything was takeout, right? And maybe the business model for them, and I do not have any insight, it was not working. But I do know that a lot of operators that we've worked with did pull service included during COVID because how can we do a 20% service charge
Yeah.
when you aren't receiving service?
I live in a little town in north of Seattle, and one of our restaurateurs in Seattle, Ethan Stoll, put his first restaurant into the Edmonds market where I live, and he did that 20% charge at the end. And it's so funny because it's a pretty affluent area, and a lot of people would tip 20% anyway, but they felt when they were forced upon them, they got kind of angry. And I felt like it's almost like you need to give the diner, for at least some of these folks, the feeling that they have the autonomy to make the decision. And I feel like them feeling like they didn't have the autonomy to make the decision made some of them angry.
Yeah.
Is that a factor?
Yeah, I mean, we have definitely, and there's been operators we work with that say, please discuss with our team member about changing your tip amount. There's ways that they can do it, but I think it comes down to wanting the agency and then to automatically put it on. And even now coffee shops are putting, when you pay for a coffee and it's like, would you like to tip 20, or like I've seen 25,
Yeah.
30, or 35% as the default.
Yeah.
And I think I think that breeds distrust in some people are trying to come and be patrons. And I think there's got to be, it comes down to the operator's decision. But I guess broad strokes, I think there is a way in which service included, having some wellness fees can be done very, very well as long as the consumer is informed. I think there's going to continue to be statewide pushback. I know the IRC has been working with the state of California around some service charges they're trying to push, and they've been, in discussion and being able to bring that down. But I think it's going to be constantly at the state level, consumer level, location, and type of business. It makes much more sense to apply 20% service charge upfront baked into the cost of X, Y, and Z. If it's a certain type of service or if a certain type of expectation. I think that's the ones where it's easier for us to negotiate.
How do you so automation's been a big thread through today's conversation before you came on, but in lieu of all of these pressures, like just labor and all that stuff, and even finding labor, like have your people that you work with kind of looked into different automation things, whether it's front of house or back of house? Like, what do people feel about that?
I find that a lot of the administrative work, so let's say reservations, guest communications, any sort of marketing has been very automated. So using ChatGPT to write captions and photographs and all this jazz. I think that that's a really great use because those are the things that tend to bog down and really require a lot of labor, but don't have direct input to potentially to revenue. It's harder to justify it, right? It's a necessity of service or a necessity of information, but it doesn't necessarily translate directly to top line revenue as one can see it as versus being on the floor and selling a bottle of wine. So I think that that's a really great use for operators to be using it. Now this is in the context too of, more independent indie sit down, more dining.
Not a Wendy's.
Not a Wendy's. Although they're predicting a lot more than
well, they're going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so basically kind of like automating all the not human kind of necessary things, right? Yeah. and finding like where the edges of that are. Yeah. And it just, yeah, it makes it so hard. Like a lot of times people just, I don't know, it's so hard to generalize, right? Because you're right. Like the worlds are almost so different. Indie versus corporate, quick service versus fine dining. It's almost like they're different industries completely, you know?
We treat them differently. I mean, I think that the the diner in a quick service fast food wants efficiency, right? They want cost effectiveness, and they want cost efficient, or they want, sorry, let me back up. What they want in fat QSRs and fast food is they want it to be, approachable and also very quick. And then on more of the independent, they want to feel like a unique experience. Because I think one thing, going back to having restaurants at the point of view, they don't want an efficient service if you're going to go pay
Yeah.
$150 a head. Like, then you're asking yourself, why did I pay for that? And I actually think that this kind of push towards nostalgia, like when I knew when the Bronco came back, I was like, oh, we're turning a corner. Like there's this new wave of nostalgia that's here that I think is
Yeah.
coming, because when I started cooking, it was molecular gastronomy, it was El Bulli of the world, and now we're going to pot pies. And I think that when the world is
Yeah.
so chaotic and everything is so transient and digital, people are craving literally things that feel homely or warm. And so
Yeah.
service, like taverns that are popping up and moving away from white tablecloths, and it's only coming more and more. Um, and
Yeah.
I think that that's something that we like, that's going to be really important as restaurants are trying to figure out who they are.
I think you were probably in New York at this time too, but it was 08, 09 after the financial crash when fancy burgers arrived.
Yes.
Like I remember the Daniel Bolidi Bistro burger that was like a short rib burger with foie in it and like gold leaf and black truffle. It was just like what was like $65 or something
Yes.
like that, you know? And like but it wasn't just them though. Everybody was kind of taking their own spin on zhuzhed up like
Mm.
comfort food, you know?
Mhm.
And you're right. I think then we had kind of a big Alinea curve, and then now we're kind of back to like my favorite restaurant. One of my favorite restaurants in New York right now is Red Hook Tavern, because it's literally just the stuff I know, but just perfected,
Right.
you know?
And actually, I'll ask both Mikes in the call, how often does Houston's come up, or Hillstone for y'all? It comes up in conversation all the time for me.
It never did because I never grew up around it. It was around when I was in New York. I've been there a couple times. I do know it's one of those like I don't even know what you call that tier, but it feels like a really nice chain restaurant that has
Not for me at
banging
all.
food
No.
actually. No?
I want to know why it's coming
Oh,
up for you,
comes up. Yeah,
Elizabeth.
why is it coming up for you?
But I think it's coming up,
Really?
yeah, all the time. The amount of restaurant, I mean, in New York, here, California, it came up when I was in a conference in Portland. It comes up all the time when I'm on, and to a
Mm.
degree in which the batting average is so high that it's kind of, I'm taking note. But I think is because it's perceived as consistent and high level, but approachable, right? They hit this really sweet spot. And I think we, even when we are working on a project opening in DC, this is the previous company I was at, that we had to go eat at Hillstone for like 4 times in a month to figure out to pick up all their cues, right? I mean, there was like this, I think there's this kind of cult
Yeah.
following, and anyway, I'm just going to put that out there because there is something to be said that it's slightly nostalgic, it's approachable, it has all these foods and
Mm.
flavors that are not fussy, and I think there's something to be said.
I think high quality, consistent yet approachable is a great like dating profile
Yes,
headline.
yeah.
That I'm just like, yeah.
Someone take note
The
of
most
that.
expensive, the most well-known restaurant in Seattle is Canlis. Have you ever been to Seattle? It's known. It invented Seattle cuisine. And during the pandemic, they started doing burgers, and they did a burger drive-up restaurant to kind of survive. And they finally took it off the menu. But what they've done since then is just be really inventive. They did a week-long Barbie-themed restaurant takeover of the restaurant, and everything was pink. They painted the restaurant pink, and it's
Oh my
just
gosh.
yeah. So they're still inventing. Even the most expensive fancy restaurant in Seattle is still trying to reinvent itself. So I think it's fun to watch that type of thing.
I think experiences like we had in the 2007, 8, 9 with these dinner clubs and all this stuff, I think it's coming back with a vengeance. And I think that also comes back to, I bring up the point of view, like what's your point of view? I think operators like Canlis who continue to innovate and push. You have normal service, you have your core competency, and then you drop in that extra surprise and delight here and there, and it totally reinvigorates your consumer base. And I think it's brilliant.
I don't know if this is a platitude, but there's certain operators that just every restaurant they put out is a hit, and even on a micro level. So in the Edmonds cellar, there's a operator called Schubert Ho, and he started with a little steak restaurant, and then he's doing like Japanese. Then he does Asian fusion, and he does a little fish. He did a fishmonger, and everyone is a hit. And I just don't know what the secret sauce is or recipe. I mean, the food is great. Maybe is it that simple? Just the food is great, and that's what succeeds.
I think, I mean, there's three core things, right? It's operations, product, and design are three. That's what a restaurant is. And when you bring it down to its core functions. Um, and I think that what do the interiors feel like? Does it feel like a space you want to be in?
Yeah, they're super welcoming. The steak place feels high end. The Japanese fusion place feels stylish with a great bar. The fishmonger place is just a walk up place where you get the fish and you go and you can sit outside. So everyone is attuned really well to the type of food.
Yeah, I think that makes a big difference. I think space and design we do a lot of that, and I think it's fundamental to the success of a business.
I think it's also of the time too. Like me and my buddy of mine were talking about Keith McNally has one of the kookiest Instagram accounts because he just runs it like a crazy person and just like he will just upload like the entire nightly service review, like listing names of celebrities who were there, and I'm like, oh my God, you just posted this on your Instagram, and then just random movie reviews. But like he seems like a guy that's just like, I know what I'm good at. Edison light bulbs and bistro stuff,
Yeah.
And he just went hard on that. And it's like, Balthazar never gets old, you know? I was in Miami recently and I went to get a drink and a snack at the Pastis in Miami. And it's funny because, like, I kind of looked around and I was like, am I in New York? It looks exactly the same. It's creepy weird. But in times like this, gestures widely, whatever this is, like I do feel like that consistency, it's a boon. It just feels like your living room, you know?
I think David Rockwell had. I just always love this quote. It's when he said he's designing. This is not direct, but basically he always wants to be timeless and timely. Right? It's this really. It's like you want to be of the times, but you don't want to be trending. And I think that's also something in design we're seeing is moving away from the neon lights, high contrast, vibrant, and going much more to deep wood panels, wainscoting,
Yeah.
maximal textiles. Like it's this timelessness that I think people are always going to go. It goes back to nostalgia. Like where do you find that balance? And I think that's something when design
Yeah.
does it right, it can just hit a nail on the head.
Is it hard? Oh, sorry, Mike.
Go ahead.
We were just talking on before about how like the Applebee's of the world are just feels like they're aging out and people are leaving and they're not coming back. And is it hard for some chains to reinvent themselves and keep up with the times? It feels like some of them just aren't doing it very well.
I mean, I think the reason you're a chain is that it's cookie cutter and it's able to break, it's a system and you just drop them in and it's franchisable and it moves on. And I think that's why they were successful. But I think kind of going back to what diners want and the consumer wants is that they're more informed than ever. And if you're going to be spending $50 a head with a drink at Applebee's, TJF, well, I guess RIP, in one of these locations, then why wouldn't you spend that in an independent business that feels cozy inside and unique to your location? Right? Because you're more informed.
Yeah.
You're seeing it on Instagram, you know where to go, and you got the new dining guide for Salt Lake City. Like, let's go, right? So I think that makes a big difference. And I'm partial.
I have a similar Hillstones question to ask both of you, but have you guys noticed over the last decade the trend of plating has gotten more minimal? Yeah, okay.
Like a meat and three.
Because like sometimes not even that. Sometimes like a slice of prime rib and au jus. Just a white plate. Like I'm a big fan of like St. John, right, in London. and they've always had food like that. They're like that to me is like the epitome of like a no BS restaurant. Like it's so stripped down, and like all the plates are just plain white. There's no unnecessary plating or anything like that. It's just like, here's a piece of fish and a lemon wedge, you know? And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's me or just everyone else seems that, but like I kind of got to a point where I'm just like, that's what I want now, you know? After I got so sick of like crazy Alinea like terrariums.
Terrariums, yeah.
Yeah.
Hydro.
Well, I don't think that ever hit the mainstream, but you know what I'm saying? Like a lot of people were more in the terrarium side before than they are minimal, but
Yeah, there's much fewer like microgreens out in the world right now. I'll say that, right? There's like,
sucks to be a microgreen distributor.
I agree.
In when you're living in interesting times, does the trend towards utilitarianism and just kind of, is that a thing that probably seeps down into the how we plate our meals?
I mean, I think I think it's a great point. I haven't thought about that, but I would say my gut reaction says yes. Kind of going back to nostalgia.
But I also have like this inkling that we are constantly just as humans just rebounding back and forth between the extremes. And so in the same way that I'm saying like, hey, minimal plates are in right now. And I think that's a metaphor for just the larger dining trend too, is like people just want stripped down stuff. I could easily conceivably see it like, I don't know, if the economy 2035 is just killer again, seeing crazy and like, every restaurant looks like Alchemist in Copenhagen again, maybe that happens, right?
Maybe does interior design and plating are inversely proportional. So interior design
Oh,
gets more
interesting.
maxi and plating gets more minimal, and then vice
More
versa.
mini.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
I think that's what yeah,
Got
I could see that rebound happening. So you see a lot, Elizabeth, in the industry. Like what are some themes from your point of view that you think are kind of overlooked or underestimated in the industry? Like what are people not talking about enough that you think they should be?
I we were talking a bunch about benefits. I kind of want to touch back on that, because
Sure.
I think it's so crucial just as a business operator. We actually launched a second company called OS Benefits, which is bringing health insurance and fringe benefits, which we identify as not traditional benefits, meaning healthcare, and 401ks, things of that nature, but more transit and gym memberships to the hospitality industry. So we have both health insurance and fringe benefits all in one
Mm-hmm.
marketplace. And I think we built that because we were listening to operators over the course of the last 5 years, just not being able to retain talent, trying to figure out ways to negotiate these benefits for themselves, but not having a negotiating power. And so we're just really, really hitting the pavement to get people to know about that. But I think that access to benefits can't be talked about enough for this industry because we're really behind, with only 32% of
Mm-hmm.
our teams even offered health insurance. So we have to kind of turn a
Mm-hmm.
corner as an industry. And so I think that's one thing that I think is not talked about. And it's thankfully in early COVID, it was the murmurs were starting, but then I feel like it's kind of come off the radar a little bit more, in my
Yeah.
opinion. But that's number one. And I would say just
Well, so
go
on
ahead.
on the benefits thing, so that's a very right. So that's a very like operator centric like conversation. How about like the diners? Like, what do you need to tell diners to be able to support that, right? Because I think a lot of diners just they see their server, but like there's a whole black box in the back called back of house that they never really see, right? So like, I mean, are there things you can do to educating or taking the diners on a journey to kind of say like, no, you should chip in the $2 on the bill or whatever to subsidize this? Like, what do we have to do as diners to kind of make that better for operators and workers?
I think um, I'm split on this one because I think that the operator should take care of their team and build into the business model and do
Mm-hmm.
that without not necessarily putting the burden on the diner some ways, right?
Sure.
I think that some operators that are mission led and that maybe it's part of their core values proposition, and they take care of people, and maybe it's even a part of their employment process, and they want to be part of the discussion and part of the education of why they exist, then they should be telling the consumer, right? Like that's part of their business model. So I think both sides of those exist, but
Mm-hmm.
I do get worried sometimes, particularly as we've kind of tracked consumers, that sometimes it feels like, why are you putting that on me? Why am I paying the 20%?
Yeah.
Why am I paying the 5% service charge for back of house? And I
Yeah.
think we all agree it should happen, but I think that sometimes there's probably a balance between putting it on the employee and putting it on the diner versus just building it to your business model.
Okay. Yeah. So most of the onus should be of the operator, kind of figure out how to get the pieces together.
Yeah, I
Usually.
think you should always start there. And then if it's part of your values and your mission and your hiring a certain hiring practices, then you should be able to discuss it and being part of why, also telling the consumer why they should come dine with you and pay more.
Yeah. 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 Okay. And then you were saying something else.
What was I saying? You were asking about other things that are overlooked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think cash flow is always one. Again, I keep going back to a lot of the operators. Like I'm trying to put my butt in the seat of a diner, but I would say definitely that. And I think the other one actually now I'm kind of just came to mind. It's very interesting with this no alcohol, no ABV movement because
Yeah.
I think a lot of restaurants' bread and butter, I guess not necessarily a good pun for this one, but is a lot of their
Is
money
alcohol
was alcohol
sales.
sales, right? Like their alcohol
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
was 30% margin on their bills or made by alcohol. And all of a sudden that 30%, let's say 20 to 30% of sales has to be recouped through something else. And I think that it's very fascinating. I think that the THC, CBD consumption and beverage form
Mm.
has helped. I think mocktails, low ABV options help as long as consumer can justify the purchase of that. If they're not just drinking
Mm-hmm.
water, which I think they do. I think people want to pair with their food. They just don't necessarily want alcohol. So I think operators are getting very inventive on that. And I'm still hopeful that the Piquette, the low alcohol wine, will catch on one day. Because I'm a huge
What is
fan.
this?
Piquette, which is like the second pressing of wine, where you make wine and then you
Oh.
do a second fermentation. So it's lower alcohol. So it's like almost more,
Oh,
Huh.
yeah, it's
interesting.
like 7% versus 14. Anyway, I'm hoping that catches
It's more
on.
like beer.
Yeah, it's more like beer.
Well, that makes sense. It's like the secondary dashi that you make.
Yes.
I relate everything to umami, and you're relating everything to wine. So here
Yeah,
we
here we
are.
are.
I didn't know
Elizabeth,
that was a thing.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to
No, it's
interrupt you
okay.
again. What about loyalty programs? It feels like that's a big deal for independents and also chains. How are those evolving? Are you seeing change there?
Oh my gosh, that's such, yeah, so much. I think loyalty is queen and it's like can't be overlooked enough. And I think with that comes loyalty has a lot of different people think of like punch cards and buy 10 coffees, get one free. I think it's more
Yeah.
loyalty and hospitality, I think takes multiple forms. There is definitely that where you punch in your number, square, you get loyalty points. But I also think it's data management. Like how much do you know your consumer? How are you tracking your CRM? When they walk in the door, you know they want a 50-50 gin martini with an olive and a twist. Like how are you hitting the mark every time? Because that's what's going to differentiate you. And that to me is also loyalty. It's gaining loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's making sure that,
And
yeah,
it's also one of the quiet places where AI is probably actually happening around the data management, giving you better understanding.
absolutely. And I think a lot of technology, and I'm sure Kristen maybe touched on this, was, before I guess in the last couple of years, there's been so much pressure on tech to have more for operators to have more visibility into their data. And I think operators are also making moves in technology to be able to have more information available to them. Where I think about the DoorDashes of the world that totally didn't let you have any customer information to even talk to them again. So they became the
Mm.
middle technology between you and your end consumer, and they're taking 30%. Like that no longer has legs here. I don't think. I think operators are like, I don't want that. And so people are changing reservation systems. There's that articles that have come out about open table gaining an immense amount of traction
Yeah.
and loyalty from operators and diners. Things like that I think are changing fast.
Fascinating.
We're also talking to David Rodolitz, who is co-founder of Flyfish Club, and just also the general. I mean, we've seen like the Carbone guys to it, like the site. Is there a resurgence of like private clubs, or am I just like, yeah, you see that too?
My gosh,
Okay.
luxury trains, luxury alternative travel, and private clubs. They're micro, or they can be bigger. Like there's a lot of wind in the sails of the Soho houses of the world, plus independent single brick and mortar um, private clubs and residencies and clubs that
Yeah.
can be, yeah, they're all over the place. And operators are getting pulled, just like they were with the domains of the world to go build out Hudson Yards. It's happening now for private
Mm.
clubs.
Where do you think that's coming from? Besides the business opportunity, like what do you think the human kind of want is there?
Is it tribalism?
I think great. I mean, yeah, I think people are trying to find community all over the place and like-minded, right? So the world keeps getting divvied
Yeah.
up and the Venn diagrams keep overlapping and you're trying to find each other because we live so remotely. And I'm sure there's private clubs for only the travelers that are traveling through places. Like what's the Centurion Lounge if nothing else? To find your tribes. And yeah, I think it's totally part of that. And I think people are very isolated um, in our worlds right now and are constantly trying to collide with each other.
I think it's a good thing generally because like I think like sometimes they turn some people off because they just feel very exclusive and like snooty necessarily. But like we've got like a loneliness epidemic, and so like I'm all for like if you have to like wall off a section for people to just feel like it's a community rather than just a transactional restaurant. Like I think that's good. I guess it's just like what is a I don't know, what does an entry level version of that look like? I guess like do clubs have to necessarily be kind of like an expensive thing,
Right.
with a buy-in? Or like could you have a casual one that's cheaper? I don't know.
I think a neighborhood restaurant can be perceived as such. Like I've been a big proponent of, if you want to be a neighborhood restaurant, you want to gain loyalty of your neighbors, like why not have house accounts? And what a better way of saying this is an extension of your living room and we are we're two doors down, you owe us once a month. Or you have the pint that's hanging with your name on it. Like to me, that is the ultimate sense of loyalty and of clubs.
And I love that because you don't have to come up with some intricate program and have a $10,000 initiation fee. It's literally just like I get to walk out of here without paying because they just bill me later.
Right.
Like that's powerful, I think. Yeah,
And it's interesting
that's enough.
to kind of take it even broader. It's, when with, I always, when Soul Cycle came out and there was this identity of like trying to find your soul, find out who you are. And there's also in the heels of, things like organized religion coming out of vogue and lack of loyalty to religion and all this stuff. And then you pair that with, this sense of wanting to find each other. I think it's so interesting to see how
Mm,
people are reorganizing because we are in a cultural we are reorganizing as trying to
yeah.
find each
Yeah.
other, and it's not through your community centers, it's not through your churches, it's not through whatever that may be previously in a previous generation. It's through food and beverage and lifestyle here.
I was in San Sebastian a couple years ago and
Humble
Basque Country in
brag.
Spain. No, and I'm not trying to humble brag. What there's these private dining clubs that you only get to go to if you're invited to, and I just thought it seems so exclusive, but it also seems so much of the neighborhood and built around the community of the neighborhood. And so there's a hyper local nature where I think some of these dining clubs can bring people together. To your point, Mike, where there's loneliness, but also our neighborhoods we need more fabric there, and so I think
Yeah.
that's a model that could come to the U.S. I think.
I think that's really useful because I think I read some article. They were kind of like studying like the youth of today and how they like there's a surgence of like young people shuttling off to the right and like being MAGA is like cool and socially acceptable for like younger people now. And I think like one of their theories was that, because of COVID, these kids came of age in COVID when they maybe would have been hanging out at a basement house party with guys and girls. They kind of segregated off into their like little rooms, and especially with like males, they just kind of like only hung out with males,
Mm.
and that just kind of recycled like the Joe Rogan effect over and over again. And they kind of, because like when you kind of have other people that have a different energy, different gender, different background as you kind of have to moderate a little bit when you're in a room together. You don't have to do that when you're on a Discord server with everyone is a male just like you.
Yeah,
So
echo chambers are
I
real.
think these
There's
things.
nothing to balance out you got to balance out the toxicity by bringing in different people.
And honestly, like a restaurant is the most easy way to do that is to just say, hey, I'm just going to eat my same meal here in a room with other people. And, you can't just do whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a popular thing. All right. So this is called the Tomorrow Today Show. So I want to ask you a couple questions about the future. You ready?
All right, let's go.
All right, let's time travel for a moment. You just woke up, it's 2035, and you go out the door and you're walking around a thriving restaurant district. What do you think you would see as you're walking up and down the street that might surprise you?
That might surprise me. I feel like, oh my gosh, such a good question. I think might surprise me is that they'll be perceived as like old school restaurants. And I think about like the Galatoirs of the world of New Orleans, that they actually will have people serving, like they'll actually be having team members on the floor administering hospitality, right? I mean, like I feel like that's something that will happen.
Well, that'll surprise you that something didn't change.
That's something that would be received as like vintage, right? Like that would be perceived like
Vintage.
that would be that things
Okay.
will be evolving so fast. I guess that's not 2035. That's like further out, like 10 years from now. I feel like I don't know what I should have thought through this, knowing the question, knowing the title of the podcast.
Mike's pop quizzes are tough, man. You mentioned modernist cuisine, like when you first started. What is the modernist cuisine of like 10 years from now? Like, are we going to have like super high tech? Like, what's modernist cuisine 2.0 look like?
I think it's going to be optimization and functionality. So it's going to be like not necessarily technique of like spherifying using hydrocolloids of liquids. It's going to be what is the most efficient food product I can have to live longer. It's going to be about longevity. I think actually that's my answer to your first question. I think that there's going to be this beginning of the advent of these like longevity dining consumptions that are going to manifest itself through brick and mortars. Like I think like Equinox came out with this new version of itself that's like the longevity program that's like $40,000 a year that you can like they'll help you like live longer. It's happening, and it's like and the optimizing of one's own being. And I think that's why alcohol consumption's down. I think it's why microplastics in food is being and preservatives are being really scrutinized. So I think that that's going to happen in 2035.
We're all going to try and live longer, yet the world's going to blow up before we all can die.
I know, trying to suspend time. Yeah.
But I want to see it. I want to see it happen.
I don't.
Jeez, what a
okay.
show.
Take me.
What a show.
No, take me out to pasture. My grandmother always joked that it was old fashions and humidity that got her to 97. So, if that's what I want.
Old fashions and humidity.
Yep, old fashions, humidity. I don't want take me out to pasture.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so related question, and this is the stock question everybody gets asked is, you have a crystal ball and it can tell you anything about restaurants in the next 10 years. What would you ask the crystal ball?
What would you ask the crystal ball? I would ask it, what is the number one factor to adjust for an operator to make them sustainable and profitable? Like mine's going to come back to like building businesses that are resilient, because I think that would be the whatever that crystal ball can tell me about that perfect balance and equation of making these businesses work. That's what I want to know, because we're fighting for that every day.
So you're kind of like, so you're wondering like, what is the core secret sauce you have to thrive in the future?
For a restaurant.
How likely do you think it might be not the answer you expect, which is what you said about like good solid fundamentals? Like maybe the core competency is like, I can make anything go viral,
Yeah.
I mean, how crazy would that be? But like,
yeah, I mean, I don't know what it's going to be. My mind goes straight to like, what do you know on hand and what's most ignored, which is usually the fundamentals of your business. So let's start with that. And then create it. So I always say, like, if you can get that right, then the creativity has more room and more bandwidth to thrive, right? You don't have to be, you're in the kitchen, you're not at the desk, you're not doing payroll, you're on the floor, right? Like that's where hospitality and food thrive. So maybe they're one and the same, just from a different perspective.
Got it. Okay. Well said. Elizabeth, thanks for coming on. Future of Restaurants could not have had one of these conversations without you. So really appreciate you spending the time with us. Oyster Sunday, OS Benefits, everyone check it out. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank y'all so much.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
It's really great to be here.
All right, everyone. Hey, we've got an old friend of mine, David Rodolitz here, longtime veteran of the restaurant biz. co-founder, co-owner of Flyfish Club, one of the most written about and sought after spots in the city, or the world for that matter. David, thanks for coming on.
I'm happy to be here, Mike. Good to see you, man.
Cool. So let's jump right into it. Tell us a little bit, for the listeners that may not know, tell us a little bit about Flyfish, but also like the journey it took you to get to where you guys are today.
Yeah, wild journey. I would just say to start Flyfish Club, because a lot of people, are a little confused sometimes with the blockchain component. At the end of the day, it's a members club rooted in a culinary focus with social experiences and a fun and dynamic community. We put food on a pedestal. We do it in an environment that's 3 levels, 12,000 square feet. And it's just a place for people to come together, enjoy great food, hang out with people, listen to music, a lot of member programming. We also have a private omakase experience within it. So it's a dynamic space. It's lively. It's generally nighttime driven, because we just think that that allows our members and our team to really show up and focus and come there with certain intentions. And then we have brunch on the weekend as well, because brunch lends itself to being a fun service. But the journey, it started as again, same ethos of culinary driven and a social community. But we started with this innovation where we launched memberships on the blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
My partner Gary Vaynerchuk, it's no surprise, was a trailblazer, is a trailblazer in a lot of things that are very tech forward, very progressive. And he believed in blockchain, leveraging blockchain specifically around non-fungible tokens at the time, NFTs. And when everybody was focused on kind of these screenshots and digital ownership over, some imagery, we were focused around the utility behind what NFTs represents, where you could instantly prove ownership over something and instantly transfer that ownership over something. So we were focused on the utility component behind it and had an aha moment where if you could take kind of like a Rayos model where you own the table, even though you don't really own it, you can't monetize it. But that
Yeah.
idea of like it was your table, kind of wrap it in an NFT, combine it with something like Soho House, which was the kind of tried and true member club at scale, put those things together, put it in the blockchain, non-fungible token. We got excited about this idea that instead of just renting a membership, you could own a membership.
Yeah.
Through the years that iterated, we have the blockchain piece, but then we ran parallel with a standard membership model, which mimics the general framework of all the other members clubs. We, kind of believe that we now have the best of both worlds, where it was this very innovative launch, but now a framework that most people understand that might have a little bit less friction. Again, just rooted in culinary experiences and a robust member community.
Yeah, and I think I've known you for a while, and I've talked to you kind of check it in periodically ever since the genesis of Flyfish. You're before
Yep.
this, you were deep in the Empeon empire. You were crucial in building that up. So I know like hospitality has always been kind of central, but like I just kind of want to tag off like what was sort of the theory of the functionality NFT that was attractive to you guys, and maybe what happened in the marketplace that caused you guys to adapt that a little bit.
Yeah, so after MPON days, I started VCR Group, which is just
Yeah,
simply the initials of Vaynerchuk, Capon, and Rodolitz. And then there
Josh
was another
Capon,
part, Josh Capon,
formerly,
celebrity
yeah.
chef. And then there's another chef partner named Connor Hanlon that's involved in the group that was a veteran from the Carmelini group, NoHo Hospitality Group. So I think when we started VCR Group, again, it was kind of like a moment in time that blockchain technology really just, it was around for a while, but really kind of ramped up, accelerated specifically around non-fungible tokens. And Gary just got wildly excited. We were having brunch in my house, and he was like, I think we need to find our use case around blockchain, leveraging blockchain, because VCR Group as a whole, we wanted to be more of a modern hospitality company and leverage media, leverage IP, leverage technology to try to create some advantage in our industry because of how difficult our industry is right now and is known to be. So that was a little bit more of our entry point with it. And what blockchain and NFTs allowed us to do at the moment, when we started it, was first, we sold a lot of memberships on the blockchain,
Yeah.
which allowed us to generate a lot of revenue before really creating the concept. We then had obviously fulfill all of our obligations, find the perfect space, create the business, build the place, launch it, do all the things that it took us 3 years to do, which we're very proud of.
Yeah.
But it kind of gave us an ability to generate a lot of revenue up front. It allowed us to do things a little bit more, strategically, where we had, revenue behind us that allowed us to take a big swing. It allowed us to be a little bit less transactional about all of our moves. It allowed us to get an amazing space that normally maybe we wouldn't have been able to do,
Yeah.
because when you try to jam everything just through food and beverage sales, it's quite difficult to be very transparent. We all know that
Yeah.
occupancy is very high, labor is very high, inflation is real, cost of goods is real. So what this allowed us to do was kind of have our entry from a little bit of a mitigated place, where we could take a bigger swing with a space where it's super special, 12,000 feet. We could take on a bigger rent. We could hire better talent. We could do
Yeah.
all these things because we had a little bit of a larger runway from a revenue standpoint. And then that has kind of proved to help us throughout this entire journey. The membership sales allowed us to capitalize this in a different way than a lot of other projects we've done. Then we were able to go to market in the standard membership model with dues that are maybe a little bit more modest than maybe some of our other comps in the market,
Right.
which allows us to get a lot of members in an environment that's not egregiously priced.
Yeah.
So then that create all of these things are almost like a feedback loop, and they're benefiting one another. And then the value proposition we're providing to our members is healthier. Then, because of the dues, we're able to forward some of those benefits onto the members again, where we not discount, but we don't charge as much on the food and beverage as maybe we would need to in a
Yeah.
traditional four-wall EBITDA model restaurant like we have in our other restaurants,
Yeah.
because we have this healthy dues model. So then our members are coming back even more. We're
Yeah.
seeing them 2 to 3 times a week, because we're not hitting them over the head with egregious food and beverage costs. So this all started because of the NFT, and then we keep taking these moments and opportunities to provide value to our members, which is allowing them to come back more. The cadence is more, the frequency and behavior is more, and then we could rely on these food and beverage sales more, so we could just make our model more intentional, and it just kind of promotes the next step of our business.
Yeah. So it's not like the NFT thing kind of went away, because I noticed you can still kind of do some of the leasing, right? On if you
You
were one of
you
those early buyers. Yeah.
You can, it didn't go away. We've honored and fulfilled, and I'm so proud of this because we spent 3 years thinking about it while we iterated, because we're so grateful to that community. But there was kind of a moment in time that it kind of stopped, in terms of we're not issuing more NFTs. We're
Uh,
not doing more with it. We don't take royalties from the NFT sales anymore. We've fulfilled our obligations. We're proud of everything about that innovation. And we continue to support everything that we've done with it in the past. But now that's kind of like in its own journey, and it was kind of how we began, and gave us an amazing starting place and an amazing community. These people are awesome. They're at our club all the time, but the ongoing focus is not the blockchain memberships, but we honor everything that we promised, from leasing to the original sales and whatnot. We just don't monetize it
yeah.
ourselves anymore. We just
Yeah.
facilitate the ability for all of our promises to still happen in the future.
Yeah. And that was always the intent. It was sort of a means to an end, right? It was. It's not. You can't build a restaurant around just have being on the blockchain. You got to
It,
have the
you,
hospitality and everything.
yes, the only thing that I think, it was this moment in time, and nobody knew what it was going to be.
Yeah. Of
I'm proud
course.
that we just kind of we pounced on it the second
Yeah.
we saw it, and Gary, as the trailblazer, kind of like put that fire under me. That being said, the model that we came up with around it, which was, people would sell their memberships, if they were traveling, or, the leasing would have allowed us to monetize more, which would then have not needed us to do standard dues. So that was either, we iterated from that, or that was a miscalculation. Things move so fast. There
Yeah.
was no there was no proof in any of this. So proud that we did it, but then we had to watch how the market adjusted. The marketplaces that sold the memberships kind of did a race to the bottom. There was too much competition between the open seas and the other new marketplaces that sold the NFTs, that the royalty model, as exciting as it was in the beginning, it almost went away about a year later, and it wasn't a reliable way to really
Yeah.
allow this to breathe in the future.
So, I mean, I think this is also, you alluded before about kind of occupancy's high, labor's high, and things like this. It almost seems like the conditions of running a restaurant in modern day almost forces operators to kind of think outside of the box, whether, forget not just NFTs, but you got to find some sort of alternative revenue stream to just make it easier to run a restaurant. Like, do you feel that? And like, are you seeing other people take different approaches to get creative?
We uncomfortably feel that, but we lean into that.
Yeah.
I think first you have to identify that it's true, and across all elements of it, it is so tight. Occupancy, insurance has almost doubled. Landlords have not softened their rents because they're holding the
Wow.
line tight. Um, you know, Inflation, food costs,
Yeah.
congestion pricing in New York, which then creates, forwarding more costs onto the business because deliveries cost more. Everything is happening. Minimum wage, continues to go up. So all of these things, like, the pie is still the pie, but it's just shrinking what potential margin could be. So yes, I think you have to find new ways to think about the model. We have a collection of restaurants, from lowbrow QSR to highbrow, high touch, a very human, a very thoughtful experience, from Ito Omakase to Flyfish Club. So we're odd that we kind of span across all segments of the food industry. Um, but why I bring that up is, like, I think, Flyfish Club was a good example of how we thought about innovation and how to hedge against the rising costs. I think Ito Omakase as well. Like, the omakase model is very interesting, where you could generate a lot of revenue in a small amount of space.
Yeah.
So there's an arb right there on the occupancy.
Yeah.
Normally occupancy is between, you want it to land between 8 to 9% of sales. A lot of places are 10 to 11% of sales, but you really want 8 to 9%, where omakase, if you have the demand, could be 3 to 4% of sales. And then
Yeah.
there's also a labor arb there as well, where you don't need a lot of people to run the experience, because your sushi masters are kind of your labor. So there's a couple things happening there, that you pick up about 10 to 15 points on the omakase model, and then you pay that forward into getting really premium fish flown in from overseas 5 days a week. So then you lose some points on your COGS, and then you still end up in a better place. So I think you have to think about it across the board. If you just go into it and sign whatever lease and operate the way you normally would have, I fear that most likely it's not going to work. But if you think about things differently, you leverage your brands and your IP to work with developers that'll capitalize your stores, or give you heavy TI. TI is tenant improvement packages.
Yeah.
That's one way to go about it. Again, if you're a brand or a group that has leverage, and you have these concepts that are very attractive, you could do licensing deals or management deals, where, again, these stores are capitalized on your behalf. So I think there needs to be some arb, some advantage of way that you enter the model, or else you're stuck in a very traditional landscape,
Yeah.
which which just, the reality is that there's just less and less to go around, and all of the other fixed elements around it, COGS,
Yeah.
labor, occupancy, insurance, has just gotten more and more expensive, and
You
it's just
just
it's yeah.
You said something that just made me occur something new I hadn't thought of before, is that the omakase as just an arbitrage on the business model. Because obviously I've been a fan of just the omakase way of eating and the art form, right? But it just occurred to me because like I relocated back to my hometown in Detroit back in 2020 after New York for 18 years. And the first thing I realized when I got here was that the sushi scene is absolutely completely could not be any more different. We have one omakase guy here. He's the first one, and he won a James Beard Award like immediately because nobody knew what he was doing. And then I remember when I come back to visit New York City and just look through Resi or Open Table, and there's so many
So many.
omakase spots. And it never occurred to me that there's maybe so many of them because rents are so high that people just need to maximize that earnings on that seat. Like, does
Yeah.
that check out? I mean,
I think it does check out. I don't know if it's so intentional from everybody, but I think there's
sure.
two things happening and they're matching up. It's an attractive business model from an operator standpoint because of all the things I just mentioned. And
Yeah.
I think there's also from the consumer standpoint, there's new behaviors that have happened over the last bunch of years. And I think people are more thoughtful about what they're putting in their body and generally like the fish, Mediterranean seafood diet is attractive. I
Yeah.
think people are more discerning and like really premium experiences, and omakase became in vogue. It's
Yeah.
cool. There's social currency around it. I learned that word from you, Mike Lee, probably about 15 years ago when you taught me about social media and how to do everything. But I think sushi photographs beautifully. I think that's a real thing as the rise of social media and Instagram and everything around that. I just think it's dramatic. I think it's gorgeous, and I think that it makes people want to eat there. I think people are excited to eat that way because you feel better at the end of the experience. It's
Yeah.
lighter, and obviously the fish diet. And then from the operator standpoint, there are a bunch of arbitrages happening that allow you to have a healthy business revenue without as many operating costs compared to traditional full service restaurants.
Yeah, I kind of hope that the one omakase guy we have here spurs a lot of competitors because I think
Yep.
they'll compete and us eaters will win, right? So,
Yep, for
and
sure.
it and so like, all right, so you've got this kind of club model as well too, and I think like since the pandemic, I think the public at large, especially when it comes to going out, like we've all kind of had to recalibrate our relationship with like community spaces and I don't think a lot of people realize how valuable restaurants were in their life, maybe until they were taken away from them for a while.
Yep.
What have you guys learned in the last 5 years that's influenced maybe how you approach building community spaces that, have a certain vibe?
Yeah, I think a few things on that, and I don't know if I'll answer it exactly, but I think what we saw over COVID, people long for and definitely need social experiences, and we leaned in. We kind of created a VCR group during COVID, and felt that when the pandemic ended, that people were going to be ramped up and amped up to go out, and we
Yeah.
wanted to be in the beginning of that journey, and kind of like went very aggressive in building our hospitality company. Over the last 3 years, we've opened up 7 restaurants, have 3 more in the pipeline, and a bunch of LOIs out. So when everybody else was nervous, we kind of leaned in. I think we also saw over COVID, and I don't know if it was true or not, but there was a lot of kind of marketing or ideas around that. Members clubs were safer because they weren't necessarily public spaces.
Sure.
And even though there were the same amount of people going into these places, it was more like, there was this gated community of people that knew each other and were like-minded. And, that would lend itself to being a healthier place and just a public place that a lot of people could go into every single day. I don't know if that ever tracked, but I think that we saw a lot of members clubs accelerate over COVID. I think the way we think about environments, and I'm dancing a little bit in your question, but from members clubs to Little Maven restaurants, all the other things that we have in the pipeline, we're thinking about a couple things. One is first, are we creating places that we want to be at?
Yeah,
We
right.
meaning me, my partners and I.
Yeah.
I'm 40, I'll be 44 next month. We live in this like 40 to 50-year-old demographic. We have some great people in their younger 30s. We have some people that tilt 50s to 60s, but if we're growing with our demographic and we're building places that we're passionate about, then we generally feel like people are going to want to be there because we could speak for the demographic that we hang out in. If we're
Mm-hmm.
passionate about it, I think that we're going to want to be there more often. We're going to spend, a lot of time thinking about these places, and we're generally going to be all in. And I think that that passion is going to, show into the guest experience. And ultimately, we're going to create places that our friends and our communities want to be at. So I think obviously the passion, always comes into play. We're also thinking about something that seems pretty generic, but our group, we try to represent fun. It's a silly word, but like we're having a good time. We approach everything with humility. We're very serious at what we do. Like the craft is very important, but we
Yeah.
don't take ourselves too seriously. There's no pretentiousness. We try to approach everything with humility. And I think people want to have a good time. I'm not knocking fine dining or any of these beautiful art forms that exist, but I think people want to listen to a song that makes them feel a certain way. They want to be in an environment that is a little bit more upbeat and attractive and beautiful. So we're leaning into fun when we think about our places because we think that, there's a lot going on in the world. And when you come to our environments, we want you to kind of like, disconnect for a moment, enjoy beautiful food and beverage, enjoy the company that you're with, and do it in an ambiance that amplifies what you're looking for. I think
Yeah.
the last thing we're thinking about is value, whether it's, QSR, high-end members clubs, or a meticulous planned omakase experience. You could be expensive while still creating value. So for instance, like our peers, are charging $400 to $500 a head for something that I think is very similar to what we do at Ito,
Mm-hmm.
and we charge $295 a person for the omakase experience. So it's still expensive, but relative to the experience, I think it's actually modestly priced. I think no matter who you are, how much money you have or don't have, I think value is something that's very important in people's lives now. And we're leaning into that as well. So I think between value, fun, being passionate about the experiences, and creating environments that we want to be at ourselves. Like selfishly, I don't want to spend money on food and beverage anymore. I want to only go to the places. I want to go to places that I want to create the places that I would normally want to go to. I selfishly do not want to spend money at other places anymore. I just want to go to my own places.
David, I'm curious because I know a lot about Flyfish Club, and I think a lot of people know about that property. But you talked about 7 other restaurants within your portfolio. Can you talk a little bit about how you rounded out the portfolio and how you guys are thinking about growing? Are you looking for certain types of concepts, or what
Yeah.
are some areas you're looking?
Yeah. So honestly, some of them are opportunistic, some of them are extremely intentional, and some of them are in the middle. I'd be misleading if I said that everything was so strategically planned and everything was like a plan from day one. We have Ito Omakase, we have Capon's Burgers, we have Bar Ito, which is a sister concept to Ito, which is a hand roll concept with the
Mm-hmm.
same premium fish package very accessibly. We have Little Maven, which is our kind of American catch me all, concept and Flatiron with a lot of Mediterranean and international influences. We have Flyfish Club in New York, which is our members club. We have Flyfish, which is our casual seafood concept at the US Open tournament, which is really kind of geared around stadiums, arenas, and airports. We have Capon's Chop House, which is our steakhouse under development that we're opening with Simon Properties in affluent suburban markets. The first one is in Bergen County at Riverside Shops in New Jersey. And we have a second Capon's Burgers poised to open in early 2026 with another large REIT in New Jersey, near where Capon and myself live. So, and then we have a bunch of stuff in LOI in other parts of the country. So, the question was interesting because when we started VCR Group, we had all these plans and then, things adjusted. Ito was opportunistic. Masa Ito and Kevin Kim, I was very close with Masa Ito. Him and Kevin conceptualized Ito. They were building it out. but COVID happened. They then went to Miami to work with Major Food Group, and they were, involved with Zzz's, unsure of what Ito was going to be or not to be. The kind of business partner person that was kind of championing the deal and running the real estate and project management of construction, the kind of me guy, over COVID, moved his family to LA and was unsure exactly what to do with it. And that created an opportunity for me. So the day we started VCR Group, I got a call through some mutual friends and said, I think you should reconnect with Masa. Masa and I had a relationship from years earlier when I used to go to Sushi Zo days when he was the executive chef there. And then myself, Masa, and the kind of the business partner of Masa got together, and we saw there was an opportunity. I raised the rest of the money, kind of bought out the majority of the other side, partnered with Masa and Kevin, and now VCR Group is in a joint venture with Masa and Kevin. They run culinary, we run back office, kind of deal flow, business development in the future, and it's a beautiful partnership. But that's kind of the only one that they run culinary, because our group generally runs the culinary in all the other concepts we have. And then, again, Flyfish Club was birthed out of this. We knew we wanted to find a way to enter the member club world because we just thought it was a better business model, but we didn't really know how. Blockchain and NFTs came about. Gary kind of lit a fire under our butts and said, we got to figure out our way. I created 10 use cases for NFTs. And the first one was Rayos meets Soho House wrapped as an NFT. We're now, we're a top heavy group. We plan on doing this big Flyfish Club business, but didn't really have any history with operating with myself, Josh Capon, Connor Hamlin, and Gary. We had all this like top heavy infrastructure, of all these big names, but none of us were really operating our stores at the time because everything was under development. There was a place called Scampi that unfortunately didn't work out. We knew the executive chef. He was looking to do something else. We bought Scampi out, did a lease, turned that into Little Maven, about a year before opening Flyfish Club because we needed some reps. We needed to start to work together. We needed to dust off the cobwebs and actually see if we were good as a team together, rather than just working digitally through Zooms on like these big ambitious plans that we didn't really, have anything to really connect with our consumers with in New York City. Simultaneously, I had a great relationship with a gentleman named Brett Muffson. He used to be the head of development for Steve Witkoff. At that time, this was in like 2015, 16, 17, 18. He was running the Fountain Blue project when it was under Steve Witkoff. I was looking to do Empeones with him because I really wanted to have some develop some projects in Las Vegas. That project was in and out of bankruptcy for years. And Brett Muffson teamed up with Jeff Sofer. However they structured it, they brought Fountain Blue back. And then because of my relationships with Brett, we then ended up doing 3 projects with Brett Muffson and Jeff Sofer, under the new Fountain Blue in Las Vegas. And we have Capon's Burgers, Bar Ito, and our second Ito omakase experience there. Flyfish at the US Open was under Capon. He had Lore Fish Bar there. They always wanted a seafood concept there. And when we started VCR Group, we had the opportunity to turn it into a new concept, which was Flyfish. So I think through our relationships, through our kind of ear to the ground, through our ability to be very flexible and just be able to kind of be dynamic, and then also a lot of strategy, we now have 7 or so concepts and a lot more in the pipeline. Capon and Connor were big steak guys, and then that lent itself to a steakhouse, and that's why we're doing Capon's Chop House. And then it's no secret that Capon was a big burger champ. He just won his 8th Burger Bash, so we needed to have a new burger concept, and that lent itself to Capon's Burgers, which we activated with Fountain Blue in a partnership at our first location in Vegas. And now we're going to grow Capon's Burgers, hopefully into a 40, 50, scaled chain across the country.
Yeah. You've covered so much ground.
A lot going on.
But
Yeah.
what are some of the things that maybe you think like, oh man, if one day I had some time, I want to tackle that. Like, what do you think the restaurant industry needs that doesn't have it out there, like from your point of view?
Wow. I don't know. Listen, there's only so many riffs on other concepts, and there's so many types of cuisines, that you know can be done. I think we're all taking inspiration from one another to create our own versions or interpretations of things we want to do. So I don't
Yeah.
know if the world necessarily needs anything. I think it's more about creating innovative iterations of things for modern day consumers within your own filters. Um, I think something I'm thinking about. I've always been into wellness, but I think over the last couple of years I've accelerated that in all facets of my life. And I think what could be very cool for Flyfish Club now that we see that it has legs and it's working, and we have a long ways to go to really make sure that the first one does what we want it to do. But we do have the appetite to do more fly fish clubs, both domestically and internationally. I think a wellness component to Fly Fish Club could be a very cool complementary side to it. I could
Yeah.
see people being in this gorgeous, wellness facility of another 10, 15,000 feet, during the daytimes, really taking care of their mind, their body, saunas, steam rooms, plunging, fitness facilities, Pilates classes, spiritual elements, and then, as the day goes on, really then go into, more dining environments and, kind of go through this entire journey. So I could
Yeah.
see something added to a fly fish club with a big wellness piece. I think worth also thinking about potentially down the road, a hotel element either combined to a fly fish club or kind of wellness retreats in very rural areas, like you've seen in Hudson Valleys, where there's food and beverage, potentially distilleries, potentially a wellness component, and very boutique hotel cabin
Yeah.
environments. So I think we're thinking about wellness in regards to how to add that to our places. Um, I don't
Well,
know if necessarily.
that's interesting because like we were talking earlier about like how Equinox has that new $40,000 a year thing. I forget the name of it, but typically I've seen a lot of like the Equinoxes of the world come at it obviously from fitness first, and then they almost like bolt on like a food component to it,
Yep, yep,
versus what you're talking about. Like I don't know that I've seen
reverse.
like that's what I mean. Yeah, I don't know if I've seen a food first hospitality company bolt on a wellness part to it afterwards, and I'm just kind of wondering like because I think it's hard to focus on wellness, and maybe
Yep.
you can kind of give people more of a carrot rather than the stick to kind of entice
I think
them.
that's right, and I think it's no surprise. Like food and beverage is an anchor at this point. It's a
Yeah,
lifestyle. People are attracted to it. It's a reason that developers use it to place make and brings people attention to their master developments and whatnot. So I think food and beverage creates a lot of excitement. It creates a lot of attention, and then I think you want to create other elements around it that you're also trying to get people to enjoy or journeys you want them to be a part of. One other thing that just caught my attention is I do think, you know, artificial intelligence, AI, is going to continue to lend itself to our industry. I do think, especially upon the QSR models, the fast casual models, I think that we're going to see a lot of that play its role. I think robotics will play its role. I think throughput and output becomes very important when you're thinking about these models that are based on very thin margins and scale. So I think we're going to see that continue to be very important, in that side or that segment in the food and beverage industry.
what do you guys think is the ideal use cases for like AI and automation in restaurants today? Like, and are you guys working on any of that stuff?
Yeah, I'm not yet working on stuff in regards to replacing humans or it taking orders or robotics with flipping burgers or
Yeah,
or doing production in our kitchens or any of that. I do think as we scale Capon's burgers or we scale Bar Ito, the two kind of QSR concepts that we believe have a lot of ability to grow. I do think that you will see a lot of that from order taking to production to prep. I could see a world that there's a lot of that involved. Right now, I use AI almost every day in my own ways of operating. I use it to run important emails or thoughts through to just polish them up, make sure my points are clear and concise. I just use it to make my communication style better with my teams. When I'm putting SOPs in place, which are
Yeah.
standard operating procedures, I find it very helpful. Service manuals, training guides, even I'm using it right now as I think about my scale with Capon's Burgers and how we're going to hit the market, how we're going about it, the infrastructure that I need to hire, who I'm hiring when, where I'm going and when, what type of money do we need to raise, what are the right ways to build the org chart. You know, I think about all of these things. I put all of these things to paper. I don't rely on ChatGPT to do the work for me. I
Yeah.
put it all down there. I spend 90% of my time, hundreds of hours putting these thoughts to paper, and then I feed it into the model and I say, please, clean this up for me, or please
Yeah.
challenge these thoughts, or please, consolidate these thoughts into a better version of it for me, or please let me know what I'm not thinking about. And then
Yeah.
that last 10%, it really is helpful. And I'm going to continue to use it. I'm
Mm.
on it 1 to 2 hours a day right now, every
Yeah.
single day.
Well, so I mean, yeah, it's a great sparring partner, right? For that,
A great sparring
a
partner.
sparring partner that never sleeps and never judges, and it's just
That's
like,
right.
here's the thing to do it. Okay. Well, so like on that tip, there's a question we ask everybody here, and before we wrap up, I got to ask it to you, which is, if you had a crystal ball for the next 10 years in restaurants, and it could tell you anything, what would you ask it?
Wow.
What's the question, not the answer?
What is the question? That is a great one, Mike. You actually just you got me for a minute.
Stumped them.
Ask it one more
Stumped
time
them.
for me.
All
First,
right, so
I'm
let's
gonna
see. I'll
buy
set
some
this.
time.
I'll
Do
give
it
you a
again.
little long setup. Yeah, okay, here we go. All
Uh,
right, you have a crystal ball. This crystal ball works perfectly. It'll tell you whatever answer you want to know about the next 10 years in restaurants or food in general. And I'm curious, like, what's a thing that you would be dying to ask it that you're just wondering? Like, it's kind of a form of asking, like, what keeps you up at night in a little bit, you know? But
yep.
I'm just curious, like, where your head's at of like, I don't know if it's gonna happen or not, you know, or something like that.
I would love to know, because I think it's inevitable, but I would love to know, when does real estate first off, when does real estate normalize, or when do developers, lords, owners of spaces, when do they start to understand what food and beverage operators are going through,
Yeah,
and make the rents, make the occupancy more realistic for what these businesses can sustain? I feel that everyone is being, no one wants to lower their rents, or adjust their per square foot price. Everyone's using market, and they're using statistics and demographics that they have in these beautiful decks to show us of how many people are around. And unfortunately, those numbers never really work. And then you have operators like myself that are just killing ourselves, working super hard to try to make money out of these businesses. Unfortunately, my group, we do a really good job at it, but I just fear that a lot of other groups um, don't have the same ability to think about things, or have all the arbitrages that we have, or have the business partners that I have, that put us that give us an advantage over other groups. So um, and I don't think that this is just for developers to lose money and for them to be the ones that don't get value out of it. I think that there's a healthier starting point to construct deals with operators
yeah.
that make all of these leases and all of these deals actually more long term, which makes
Mm-hmm.
their spaces less vacant and less turnover. I would wonder if you actually did a study on all of these spaces, and then when the keys got kicked back to the landlord, or what it took them to actually get all the money from their tenants that they're owed when tenants are unable to pay the rent, and then they start giving their concessions, and then the
Yeah.
space is dark for a year or two, and then they have to do the dance on hiring new brokers and have to like do all of these things. I wonder if it really was just a win-win structuring. If landlords understood that operators cannot be more than 8 to 9% of occupancy, if landlords really want a healthy business model with us, the best thing they could do is give percentage rent. Of course, give some certainties that give them more comfortability, that they can handle their own bills, because they have lenders as well and they have their own, obligations. And I understand and respect all of that. That being said, 8 to 9% is where operators need to land at. And if deals were orchestrated more around that, I think you'd have more long term sustainability, less turnover, and I think that you would see them make a similar or more amount of money with healthier and friendlier relationships, and just a better environment for everybody.
I mean, that sounds like a mic drop stump speech of like, if you could get up in
Oh,
front of a bunch of landlords, like that's what
let's
I
go,
want.
landlords. Let's make
Well,
it
so
happen.
8 or 9% so that's of occupancy. So that's saying like your rent is makes up 8 or 9% a percentage of your revenue.
Yeah, simple numbers. You have a $10 million store. You don't want that rent to exceed 800, $900,000.
How far away are we from that these days?
We're far away from that. I mean,
Really
I
far
think
away.
I think I think you're
Yeah.
seeing.
Yeah.
I think and again, the problem is it's always plus plus. There's common area maintenance charges. There's real estate taxes and increases every year. So it might start at 9, 10%, but as your term goes on,
Mm,
you might dance in the 11, 12.
yeah.
If you have a soft patch and there's seasonality, or there's a lot of competition in the neighborhood, or there's a lot of sickness going around, or terrible weather, it could be 15%. And I just
Yeah.
promise developers this: the restaurant is not going to make it. We're not
Yeah.
going to make it.
Yeah.
So the sooner everyone understands that, the better. And then we could work on a more equitable solution that
Yeah.
is long term, that everybody could benefit from.
Well, and do you think like I think about the long-term effect of like if that does if nobody breaks, right? If they hold the line and nothing breaks, it's been really wild to see me relocating to Detroit too, because I've noticed the quality of restaurants here skyrocket. Because and I talked to a lot of these people, a lot of them are kind of like refugees from San Francisco, LA, New York, like and you even mentioned that you guys are working on a suburban project, right? Do you think this just
Yep.
kind of like is going to cause like a flush of talent out of big cities and into the
Yeah, I,
burbs, I guess?
I think you've seen some of that. I think you're going to see more and more of what we've seen. Like, I love New York City. It's still New York City, and you can't compete with it, and it's always going to be a magical place with such densities. That being said, there's more vacancies than I've ever seen. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think Midtown will ever be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Midtown is not a 5 day work week business. It's a 3.5 to 4 day at best, where Mondays and Fridays blend into potentially one day. Like, there
Mm-hmm.
is realities to this new world, that we're living in. Consumer behavior, people are not out as late. It's harder to get a second turn. People are eating earlier. Like, there's all these realities that everyone has to understand to create models that work for everybody. So I think you are seeing talent leave major cities because it's price prohibitive. I think you're going to see a lot of mom and pop stores that are the fabric of a lot of our cities go away, because the numbers are not sustainable to have a cute little $1 million to $2 million restaurant, because the fixed costs are just too high. Like, you just cannot sustain it. It doesn't work because, again, insurance, rent,
Yeah.
minimum wage, all of these things that you need before even starting, just take too much of a pie.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to lend itself to more multi-unit groups, having more leases, less mom and pop stores, more vacancies, operators leaving major markets to go to secondary markets, more food and beverage in affluent suburban areas, until there is an adjustment that allows us all to play in an environment that's a little bit healthier of a starting point.
Yeah.
Is there a geographic arbitrage opportunity now? Because we've seen, even in the Seattle market, our best chefs sometimes leave. We have the co-founder or one of the owners of Canos is leaving Canos. It's the most famous restaurant in Seattle.
Yeah, yeah.
And so some of them are moving to the less populated areas of the state, or going to like the South or the Southwest. It seems like that's an arbitrage opportunity.
Yeah,
Dude, the omakase place I talked about in Michigan, that's a sushi chef from Seattle who came out here because he's like, I need to get a more friendly environment. Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I think you're definitely seeing that. And you saw a lot of people move from New York to Miami over COVID, and Miami exploded and became this, mecca, in the United States. But now you're also seeing it kind of normalize and soften and find its new norm, which is above where it used to be, but below this very kind of frothy, accelerated place that it was a year or two ago. And the cracks are showing, and a lot of operators in Miami are having trouble right now, and everybody's competing for the same market share. So, yes, I do think that it pushes people to go to other places, but then I also think that, it cannot be overdone, or there's still a market that it needs to be healthy. And if you have too much supply, or too little demand, or there's just, an imbalance there, the cracks are going to show.
David, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day. We got here, we did it. Thanks for sharing your insights. And everybody check out Flyfish Club and the entire VCR empire, which is growing. So
Appreciate
thanks,
you
David.
guys. Thanks for having me.
David.
So good being here. I'll see you guys soon.